Have you ever wondered what secrets the earth still keeps hidden? What if every stone, every scroll, every mask whispered the truths of forgotten worlds? Welcome to Unearthed Secrets, a place where the past still speaks, if you know how to listen. If you enjoy unraveling mysteries with us, don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from right now. Now, let's begin. The wall that remembered every word. In the dust and silence of the Mesopotamian plains, where the Tigris and Euphrates rivers bend and stretch like veins across a sunburned land, the city of Babylon once rose like a dream made of brick and clay. Today, its ruins lie in fragments, mud walls melting back into earth, carved bricks worn smooth by the passage of time. But long ago, Babylon was more than just a city. It was a heart that beat for an empire, a place where words themselves were etched into stone so that they could never vanish. Imagine walking through Babylon at the height of its glory, under the rule of kings whose names still ripple faintly across history: Nebuchadnezzar, Hammurabi, and those who came before and after. The streets are alive with dust and voices, the cries of merchants selling oil and grain, the chanting of priests in temple courtyards, the rattle of donkeys pulling carts heavy with goods. But above all this, there is something else, an unshakable presence, a wall not merely of stone and brick but of memory, a wall that remembered every word. This wall was not alive in the way we are alive, yet it carried voices in ways no human throat could ever hold. Each brick bore marks pressed into wet clay by the sharpened reeds of scribes, those patient keepers of thought who turned fleeting speech into lines of wedge-shaped impressions. Cuneiform, it was called, the world's first true writing system, born here in Mesopotamia, where memory was carved instead of spoken, and where silence could be filled again centuries later by the eyes of those who could still read. To understand the wall, you must imagine Babylon itself. At its core rose the Palenque, the great ziggurat said to be the foundation of heaven and earth, a stepped tower whose shadow touched everything around it. Nearby stretched the Ishtar Gate, its glazed bricks a brilliant blue, adorned with lions, bulls, and dragons that seemed to prowl and leap in eternal motion. Beyond that, streets unwound into neighborhoods, into markets, into hidden courtyards where the common people lived and worked. But on certain walls, set into temples and palaces, words were inscribed, not decorative, not ornamental, but eternal. It is said that one such wall bore an inscription so vast that it captured not only the laws of the king, but the very rhythm of Babylonian life. It was a memory wall, where thousands of lines were pressed into clay before the bricks were fired, each one a story, a decree, or a prayer. Unlike the fragile parchment of later ages, unlike the fleeting words of songs carried only in breath, these words endured because the bricks endured. And because they endured, they could whisper across millennia. Picture a scribe at work. He sits on a reed mat in the heat of the day, beside a tray of damp clay tablets and a bucket of water. His stylus, made from a sharpened reed, moves with slow precision, pressing wedge after wedge, line after line. Around him children run, merchants call, the city hums, but his focus does not waver. For he is recording more than just the whims of his king. He is recording permanence. In this moment, as he marks the clay, he is aware that his hand stretches forward into centuries he will never see. He may never know who will read these words, or even if anyone will, but he knows that the wall will hold them regardless. And so, on this wall, Babylon remembered. It remembered its triumphs and its sorrows, its laws and its longings. Some bricks carried royal decrees, proclamations about taxes, land, and temple offerings. Others bore the myths and epics of the people, the tale of Gilgamesh, who sought immortality, and of Enuma Elish, the story of creation itself. Still others contained simple records of trade, lists of grain rations, of livestock, of debts paid or unpaid. And altogether these fragments made the wall less like a barrier and more like a living archive. As centuries passed, Babylon rose and fell. Empires came with armies that rattled like storms across its plains: the Assyrians, the Persians, the Macedonians under Alexander. Yet the wall remained. Even as fire swept through the city, even as roofs collapsed and gardens turned to dust, the words carved into brick did not vanish. Fire, after all, only hardened the clay further. Where papyrus burned and parchment rotted, these bricks endured, glowing faintly red with the heat of survival. The wall then became something more than memory. It became resistance against oblivion. In every stroke of the stylus, there was defiance, a recognition that while the human voice fades, the clay could still speak. Now imagine yourself standing before what remains. The desert air is hot and dry, dust clings to your shoes, and the ruins stretch out in low mounds around you. The Tigris is a faint shimmer in the distance. You place your hand against the rough surface of a brick, worn with time, yet still grooved faintly with marks. To the untrained eye they might look like scratches. To a scribe of Babylon, however, they were words, alive, structured and flowing. Each wedge a syllable, each line a sentence, each brick a fragment of thought. What would the wall tell you? Perhaps it would whisper the edicts of a long-dead king. Perhaps it would sing the hymns offered to Ishtar, goddess of love and war, or Marduk, lord of creation. Perhaps it would murmur of barley harvests, of wages owed, of rituals enacted at dawn. The wall did not choose what to remember. It remembered everything entrusted to it. There is something profoundly human in that, the desire not merely to live, but to leave something behind that endures. In Babylon, writing was not only a tool, it was a bridge. It linked the present to the future, the living to the unborn. Each word pressed into clay was an act of faith. Faith that someone, someday, would care enough to read, and indeed, someone did. Centuries after Babylon crumbled, its ruins lay buried beneath layers of sand and soil. Travelers passed without understanding. Locals built villages nearby, and for ages the city was forgotten. Yet when archaeologists uncovered the ruins in the 19th century, they found walls still marked with cuneiform. Scholars bent over them, painstakingly copying wedge after wedge, until at last the voices of Babylon were heard again. After thousands of years, the walls still remembered, and now, once more, so could we. In these recovered words lay the blueprint of civilization, the first codes of law, the first myths, the first attempts to record the world not with pictures or symbols, but with structured language. The wall was more than Babylon's, it was humanity's, a gift carried across time by nothing more than clay, patience, and the will to be remembered. As night falls in Babylon, the ruins grow quiet. The desert wind moves through broken stones, and the last glow of the sun fades into cool shadow. But somewhere, in the grooves of an ancient brick, the memory of words still lingers. Words once pressed by careful hands, words meant to last beyond lifetimes. The wall does not speak aloud, and yet it is never silent. It remembers still, waiting for anyone who wishes to listen. And so the wall endures. A testament not only to a city, not only to a people, but to the very human need to leave a trace, to tell the world, we were here. The ship that sank with the sun. Beneath the waves of the Mediterranean, where the light fades into muted blue, there lies a vessel that once carried the very heartbeat of the Bronze Age world. They call it the Uluburun shipwreck. It was discovered off the southern coast of modern-day Turkey, but in its wooden bones and in the cargo it carried, rests a memory of an entire civilization's interconnectedness. This was not just any ship, it was a floating treasury, a miniature map of the late Bronze Age world, sealed by the sea. Imagine the ship now, as it once was, above the waves. Its timbers creaked under the golden weight of copper ingots, its hold stuffed with resins and ivory, with jars of oils and pomegranates, with glass meant to glow like captured fragments of the sun. Imagine the sailors, faces darkened by sun and salt, standing barefoot on planks, their hands tightening rope against the wind as the Mediterranean horizon stretched endlessly around them. And then imagine its ending, sudden and silent, a descent into darkness, a sinking that left its treasures untouched by hands for more than 3,000 years. This is the story of that ship, a ship that carried the sun and sank with it. It begins with its discovery. In 1982, a Turkish sponge diver, his name, Mehmet Çekir, was searching for sponges along the rocky coast near Uluburun, close to the town of Clach. The water was deep, clear, and treacherous, filled with stone promontories and hidden currents. While diving, he noticed something strange, bronze shapes lying scattered on the seabed, green with corrosion, shaped not like natural stone but like tools of men. He had found the ghost of a ship. Archaeologists descended on the site in awe. For years they dived, sometimes more than 20,000 dives in total, recovering piece by piece the cargo that once rested in the belly of the Uluburun ship. What they uncovered was staggering. The ship had sunk around 1300 BCE, during the height of the Late Bronze Age, when kingdoms and empires from Egypt to Mesopotamia, from the Aegean to Anatolia, were linked by trade, diplomacy, and war. The Uluburun wreck was not just a ship, it was a library of objects, each whispering stories of distant lands. First, there was the copper, more than 10 tons of it. Copper ingots, stacked like loaves of bread, each one bearing the distinctive oxhide shape, broad at the ends, narrow in the middle, so they could be carried on the shoulders of men. This was the raw material of the Bronze Age. Combined with tin, it became bronze, the metal of weapons, tools, and status. Alongside the copper lay nearly a ton of tin. That ratio, 10-to-1, was no accident. It was exactly the recipe for bronze. This ship was not a random trader, it was a vessel of industry, a link in a chain that forged swords for kings, chisels for builders, and ornaments for temples, and then the exotic cargo. There were jars of terebinth resin, used for incense and perfume, their scent still faint even after millennia underwater. There were glass ingots, blue and turquoise, the color of captured skies, waiting to be melted into beads or vessels for elites. There were elephant tusks and hippopotamus teeth, reminders of Africa's distant plains. There were ostrich eggs carved and hollowed, destined to be luxury items for the wealthy. There were also Canaanite jars filled with foodstuffs, pomegranates, almonds, figs, all long since decayed, but still recognizable in their seeds and husks. Imagine them, fresh and fragrant, packed carefully to feed the journey, or to deliver as gifts. The ship was also carrying weapons, daggers, swords, spearheads, some of them finished, some raw. Jewelry too, beads of carnelian, faience and gold, each glimmering with a story of trade and craft. But perhaps most intriguing of all were the small things. A scarab amulet of Nefertiti, the Egyptian queen, lay hidden in the cargo, a sign of Egypt's reach and influence. There were balance weights, precisely crafted, used by merchants to measure and negotiate value. There were even remnants of musical instruments, lyres that once filled the ship with song under the wide bronze sky. It was a ship heavy with the world. But what kind of journey was this? Historians believe the Uluburun ship was a royal or diplomatic vessel, carrying tribute or gifts between powerful courts. The sheer variety of its cargo, copper from Cyprus, tin perhaps from Central Asia, ivory from Africa, glass from Canaan, luxury goods from across the Mediterranean, spoke of a network so vast it almost seemed modern. This was globalization, Bronze Age style. The ship may have been bound for a great kingdom, Egypt, Hatti, Ugarit, or it may have been caught in the web of political marriages and alliances that tied rulers together. In those days, diplomacy was often sealed not just with words, but with objects meant to impress, to remind distant kings of wealth and power. Yet whatever its purpose, its voyage ended abruptly. Perhaps it was struck by a sudden storm, its sails torn, its timbers smashed against the rocky Anatolian coast. Perhaps pirates attacked, though no signs of battle were found. Perhaps the crew simply made a mistake, navigating too close to the hidden reefs. One moment, the sun lit its deck, gilding its cargo in golden rays. The next, it tilted, water rushing over planks, cargo shifting, sailors shouting as the Mediterranean opened its arms. The ship sank swiftly, swallowed in silence. The sailors' names are lost, their cries, their last thoughts, their lives, all vanished beneath the waves. But the ship remained, preserved like an offering to the sea. To imagine the Uluburun wreck is to imagine a tapestry of lives connected by trade. Consider this: a copper miner in Cyprus, hauling ore from the earth, sweat streaking his face. A trader in Mesopotamia, weighing beads against metal, his lips moving in careful calculation. A sailor in the Levant, coiling rope, singing a tune he learned from his father. An artisan in Egypt carving ivory into the likeness of a god. All their labor, all their journeys, all their hopes converged on this single wooden vessel. And then, in a twist of fate, all of it was lost, yet also preserved, waiting 3,000 years to speak again. What makes the Uluburun shipwreck so haunting is not only the wealth of its cargo, but the silence of its story. We do not know its captain's name, nor its port of origin, nor its final destination. We do not know what bargains were struck, what alliances were sealed, what ambitions lay in the minds of the rulers who awaited its cargo. We only know the traces: a scarab with Nefertiti's name, copper from Cyprus, ivory from Africa, glass from Canaan. The rest is silence. And yet that silence is powerful, for when the divers brought these things to light, they were not just objects, they were voices. Voices of a time when the Mediterranean was not divided by borders, but bound by waves, when kingdoms were fragile and mighty all at once, when ships carried not just goods but the dreams of civilizations. The Uluburun ship sank, with the sun, and in its sinking, it became a monument. Now picture it again, but not as wreckage. See it as it once was, sailing under a bronze sky, its sails swelling, its crew leaning into the wind. The sun sets behind it, turning the sea gold. The deck glows with reflected light, as though the ship itself carries the sun on its back. For a moment it seems eternal, and then the waves close over it, leaving only ripples that fade into stillness. 3,000 years later, those ripples reach us still. The cylinder that whispered to kings. In the shifting heart of ancient Mesopotamia, where rivers curved like silver veins through the land, there arose a kingdom whose stories stretched far beyond its own borders. Among the relics it left behind, weathered by dust and centuries, there rests a small clay cylinder, modest in size but monumental in meaning. Its surface, wrapped in neat lines of cuneiform script, carried words that once moved across continents and echoed through courts of kings. To hold it, if one could, would be to hold a voice, a whisper from a time when empires were not just dreamed but declared. This is the tale of the Cyrus cylinder, sometimes called the first charter of human rights, but far more than that, it is a vessel of words, a wall in clay that remembered every promise, every decree, every whisper meant for kings. Picture the land of Persia, more than 2.5 millennia ago. The air was heavy with the scent of dust and incense, the earth alive with the sound of hoofbeats and wheels, the cries of traders crossing the royal road that bound east to west. Cyrus the Great had conquered Babylon, and with that victory came not just territory, but the delicate threads of countless cultures. Babylon was a city that had seen empires rise and fall, its temples rising like mountains of brick, its ziggurats piercing the heavens. And yet, when Cyrus entered, there was no reckless destruction. Instead, there was something else, something that would be carved into clay and pressed with the symbols of an empire's philosophy. The cylinder itself was not large, only about the length of a forearm, its curve fitting neatly into two hands. Yet on its surface, line after line of cuneiform impressed itself, the wedge-shaped marks carrying meanings as sharp as the edges that had once cut them into wet clay. It did not shout, it whispered, and its whisper was for kings, both present and future. It told of Cyrus's conquest, yes, but also of his promises. Temples rebuilt, gods returned to their homes, captives set free to walk back to their lands. It is in this whisper that we begin, slowly, walking through Babylon's gates as Cyrus might have done. The walls towered above, brick upon brick, glazed in blues and golds, the lions and dragons of the Ishtar Gate staring down with eyes that had seen too much. Imagine the silence of that moment, a conqueror stepping into a city that had belonged to others, its people watching, waiting. Conquerors often came with fire and blood, but here, something different stirred. Cyrus proclaimed himself chosen, not just by Ahura Mazda, the great god of Persia, but even by Marduk, Babylon's own deity. In this declaration there was a subtle brilliance, the merging of beliefs, the weaving of authority that would bind rather than sever. The cylinder tells us this story, not with flourish but with steadiness. It does not boast, instead, it recites. Line by line, it sets forth a new way of ruling. Where once captives had been chained, now they were given freedom. Where once temples lay in ruin, now they were to be restored. For the Babylonians, weary of heavy hands, this must have felt like a breath released after years held tight. And though the words were carved in clay, they carried through time like a murmur across centuries. Let us linger here, imagining the scribes at their work. The clay soft, moist from the rivers, shaped into a cylinder, rotating gently as line upon line of text pressed into it with a reed stylus. Each wedge carefully placed, the rhythm steady, almost meditative. The scribe knew the weight of what was being recorded. These were not just words, they were decrees that would ripple outward, his hand pressed with care, each mark both fragile and eternal, knowing that once the clay was fired, the words would live longer than any single lifetime. Centuries later, when the cylinder was rediscovered in the ruins of Babylon, buried in dust and ash, it seemed to many as though it had waited. And what had it waited for? Perhaps for us to read its whisper in wonder. Cyrus's reign was not like others before him. His empire stretched wide, yet instead of erasing the cultures within it, he allowed them to breathe. Languages, faiths, customs, they were not crushed under the heel of conquest, but rather folded into the fabric of Persia. This is why the cylinder matters. Not because it was the first of anything in an absolute sense, but because it encapsulated a way of thinking that was rare in its time. Power expressed not only in domination, but in permission, in restoration. Close your eyes and imagine Babylon's streets in the days after Cyrus entered. Merchants still at their stalls, the air thick with the fragrance of dates and sesame oil. Priests walking toward temples they feared might never rise again, now hearing promises of restoration. Families whispering to one another, daring to believe that the gods of their fathers would return, that the holy statues carried off in wars might be placed back where they belonged. To them Cyrus's words were not just politics, they were life breathed back into the sacred. The cylinder becomes, in this sense, not just an artifact but a vessel of atmosphere. You can almost hear it if you lean close, not loud, but steady. It carries the tone of someone speaking not to a crowd but to a single listener, perhaps even to you. Its whisper is measured, deliberate, designed to be remembered. But clay is not eternal. It can crack, it can crumble, and yet somehow, the words endured. Fragments were found, pieced together like a puzzle. Each shard carried part of the story, and together, they revived the whisper. Scholars bent over them, tracing the grooves, their fingers running across the edges where time had bitten away. They pieced not only the artifact but also the memory of a moment when one empire sought to bind itself through words rather than just swords. Now, let us walk beyond Babylon, following the roads Cyrus laid, stretching like arteries across his empire. Imagine the couriers riding swiftly, carrying tablets and letters, spreading the word of a king whose clay cylinder whispered commands. These messages reached far lands, Persia, Anatolia, Egypt, and beyond. Each land absorbed them in its own way, each people filtering the whisper through their own tongues and traditions. And in this way Cyrus's legacy spread, not through force alone, but through words carried like seeds on the wind. The cylinder did not proclaim rights as we understand them now. It did not speak in the language of modern charters. Yet when later ages read it, they saw in its lines the echo of freedoms, the idea that rulers could be more than tyrants, that kings could listen as well as command. This is why the artifact became famous in modern times, displayed as though it were a beacon of humanity's progress. Whether or not Cyrus intended it in that way, the whisper adapted. Words often outgrow their makers. And so we return, again and again, to the image of clay, soft at first, shaped by careful hands, hardened by fire, yet always fragile. It reminds us of how power itself works, strong yet delicate, lasting yet vulnerable. Empires crumble, yet a small clay cylinder survives. A whisper outlives a shout. In museums today, the cylinder rests under glass, its lines still clear to those who look closely. Visitors lean forward, peering at the wedges, and though they cannot always read the script, they sense the weight of it. They imagine the kings who once held such decrees, the scribes who pressed them, the people whose lives changed because of them. And in that moment, the whisper continues. The cylinder that whispered to kings is in truth more than clay. It is the embodiment of how words, once set down, can travel farther than armies, deeper than monuments, longer than the walls of cities. Empires fall, but whispers endure. And so, as we let the story rest in our minds, we might imagine the faint sound of that ancient cylinder, its surface warm from the Mesopotamian sun, its lines intact, still murmuring the promises of a king who believed in words strong enough to hold an empire together. And that is where we leave it, not with silence, but with a whisper that continues, gentle, steady, eternal. The scroll that burned but was not lost. It is said that in the heart of a city where sea and desert met, there once lay a scroll that carried the voices of ages. Not parchment, not papyrus, not merely ink and fiber, but a vessel of memory, a guardian of words that survived where so much else was turned to ash. Its home was a place of wonder, a city built not only upon stone and sand, but upon a dream. Alexandria, a city where marble colonnades rose above the waves, where sailors from Phoenicia, Greece, and beyond watched the great lighthouse flare across the night sky, and where knowledge itself seemed to walk the streets, alive, breathing, and endless. The scroll, they said, should not have survived. Fire licked at its brethren, consuming shelves that groaned under the weight of centuries, swallowing inked papyri by the thousands, turning thoughts into smoke. And yet this one endured. Some whisper it was chance, tucked into a chamber overlooked, buried under rubble, carried away by unseen hands. Others murmur that it chose to survive, as though words could cling to the world as stubbornly as the people who spoke them. For in its survival, even as Alexandria's library fell, it carried forward something that otherwise would have vanished. But to understand this scroll, one must step back into the pulse of Alexandria itself. Imagine the city in its fullness, the harbor alive with trade ships, sails swollen with Mediterranean winds, laden with goods and treasures from every direction. Ivory from Africa, silk from the east, spices sharp enough to perfume the docks, and papyrus rolls stacked like bundles of golden reeds. Step deeper into the streets, and the air shifts from salt and tar to the sweetness of wine and honey, to the spice of cinnamon and pepper carried in clay jars. You hear voices, Greek, Egyptian, Hebrew, Aramaic, tongues from kingdoms you've never heard of. The city is a chorus of languages, a meeting ground where no word is too strange, for here all are gathered. And at the city's heart, perched proudly above all, the library. Not one hall, but a sprawling complex, its walls gleaming pale in the sunlight, its columns drawing eyes upward as though the very architecture wished to mirror the reach of human thought. Within its chambers, rows upon rows of scrolls stretched into the distance. Works of philosophy, poetry, law, medicine, astronomy, agriculture, mathematics, and mysteries too vast to name. They said every ship entering the harbor was searched for writings, that copies were demanded and made, originals kept in Alexandria's vaults. The world was gathered here, pressed into papyrus, awaiting the hand that would unroll and read. It was here, in some quiet alcove, far from the grand public halls, that our scroll rested. Its outer surface bore no gaudy embellishment, no golden case or jeweled clasp. Its value was not in what it looked like, but in what it contained. Lines of thought so precise, so delicate, so impossibly fragile, that to lose them would be to silence centuries, and yet silence came for many. Flames licked the walls, ash rose and drifted across marble floors. Perhaps it was Julius Caesar's siege that first scorched the shelves. Perhaps later fires swallowed what remained. Scholars still argue, but the truth is simpler. Fire came, and words were lost. Yet this scroll endured. Imagine it now. Dust settling across it as chaos raged, voices shouting, wood crackling. And when the flames receded, there it was, fragile but intact, carried perhaps by a fleeing scholar, hidden in the walls by trembling hands, stowed aboard a ship bound for some distant shore. Or maybe it lay buried, forgotten, until centuries later when the sands shifted just so. What did it contain? That is the question that haunts us. Some imagine it was philosophy, lost dialogues of Aristotle, or works of Plato unknown to us. Others whisper it was history, chronicles of kingdoms whose names have slipped through cracks of time. Some believe it carried maps, knowledge of lands beyond the horizon, guides to journeys never taken, and a few suggest it was myth, tales of gods who were not yet written in any other tongue. But what matters is not the precise words, but that it was words at all, thoughts carried forward, refusing to be extinguished. Let us walk further into that library, as if through dream. The hall is vast, with shelves like forests of papyrus rolls. The light filters in through high windows, dust motes dancing in golden beams. The smell is dry and sweet. Papyrus, ink, wax, and age. A scholar moves between shelves, fingers brushing lightly over the ends of rolls, lips moving silently as he reads titles inked upon their edges. One is lifted carefully, cradled like a child, unrolled across a wooden desk. There, by lamplight, thoughts come alive again, voices from faraway lands speaking to one another across centuries. Imagine how quiet it must have been here, not the silence of emptiness, but of deep attention, the kind of silence where every breath is reverent, every sound a disturbance. Yet outside, Alexandria bustled endlessly, fishermen hauling in their catch, markets alive with trade, philosophers debating in open squares, priests chanting in temples to gods both Greek and Egyptian, and above them all, the lighthouse, Pharos, its beacon a reminder that light could pierce the darkness, guiding those lost at sea, just as knowledge might guide those lost in thought. The scroll is part of this greater whole, a single fiber in a vast tapestry, and yet its survival grants it weight beyond measure, because it speaks to a yearning older than any empire, the human desire not to be forgotten. We write because memory fails, because time erodes, because voices fade. To write is to plant a seed in the soil of tomorrow, not knowing who may harvest it, or when. And when the library fell, thousands of seeds were burned to ash. But not this one. Its journey is hidden to us, as shadowed as the depths of the Mediterranean beyond the harbor walls. Did it sail with a merchant to Athens, tucked in a chest among wool and wine? Was it smuggled into a monastery, hidden in the folds of religion, mistaken for holy writ? Did it rest in desert sands sealed in clay, waiting for hands centuries later to pry it free? We do not know, but we can feel it, the faint pulse of survival, the stubborn persistence of words against oblivion. And in this survival there is a lesson. Alexandria's library did not endure, at least not in walls or shelves, but fragments survived, scrolls carried outward, words copied and recopied, traveling far beyond the city's fall. Ideas slipped past the flames and lived on, scattered but alive. Knowledge cannot truly be destroyed, not while memory exists, not while words are carried, not while even one scroll refuses to burn. Think of the scholars who once leaned over desks within those marble halls, their hands ink-stained, their eyes weary, their hearts filled with questions. They did not write for themselves alone. They wrote for us, though they could not have known our faces, our languages, our world. They wrote into the dark, hoping someone, someday, might unroll what they left and read. The scroll that endured is proof of that hope. Close your eyes and imagine holding it now, the papyrus fibers rough beneath your fingers, the ink faded but still legible. You unroll it slowly, breath caught in your chest, the scent of ancient earth rising from it. The words look strange at first, letters from another script, but as your eyes move over them, the meaning blooms like dawn. You are no longer in your own time, you are sitting beside the scribe who wrote it, hearing his voice, feeling his urgency. Across thousands of years he is still speaking to you, and when the scroll is rolled again, when it rests once more in silence, the lesson remains. Fire can take walls, time can take marble, ash can swallow shelves, but not everything is lost. Some words linger, some survive the flames, and even when we think them gone, they wait, patient and enduring, for the moment when hands and eyes and minds are ready to meet them again. And so the scroll that burned but was not lost remains not only a mystery, but a reminder, a whisper from Alexandria, from the city that dreamed of gathering the world into words, that even when the world burns, memory can endure. The inscription that outlived its empire. Hittites. There are stones in the world that seem to breathe with memory, as if they have waited patiently for centuries, holding on to the words of a vanished people. The Hittites were once a mighty empire, their kings riding across Anatolia and Syria, their soldiers armed with iron before most of the world even knew its strength, their scribes carving promises and prayers into clay and stone. And yet, when their empire fell, their cities burned, their palaces emptied, and their gods were forgotten, something remarkable happened. One inscription remained, a message, carved long before the fall, standing in the silence long after the Hittite empire itself had faded from the earth. It was not just words in stone, but an echo, an ember that glowed quietly in the dark of history, waiting to be read again. Tonight, we follow that inscription. We walk back through the plains of Anatolia, through crumbled gates and across vanished roads, to meet the empire that carved its words deep enough to survive the centuries. We begin with the land itself, the stage upon which the Hittites built their fragile eternity. The heartland of the Hittites lay high on the Anatolian plateau, in what is now central Turkey. It was a landscape of bare hills and wide valleys, where winters could be harsh and summers burned dry beneath the sun. The capital, Hattusa, rose from this stony land, its massive walls climbing ridges and circling fields, its gates flanked by lions and sphinxes carved in stone. From these walls one could look out across the open plains, where herds grazed and caravans passed, their wheels crunching over gravel roads. It was a difficult land, not rich like the Nile or gentle like Mesopotamia. To survive here meant learning resilience, and the Hittites had it. The kings of Hatti were not born of leisure, but of iron and stone. They forged alliances with the stormy gods of their mountains, built fortresses from rock, and harnessed the power of chariots pulled by teams of horses. Yet for all their military strength, they were also builders of words. They left behind treaties, prayers, and oaths, inscribed with painstaking care in cuneiform script pressed into clay or carved into rock. These inscriptions were meant not just for the living, but for eternity, a conversation with the gods and the generations to come. The most enduring of these inscriptions was the one left at a site called Yazılikaya, a sanctuary near Hattusa, where gods were carved in long processions on the living rock. But even more remarkable were the royal proclamations, like those carved by King Suppiluliuma, or the famous treaty with Egypt after the Battle of Kadesh, the first known written peace treaty in human history. Among them was one inscription that would outlast the empire itself, carved deeply into stone, its words etched so firmly that wind, rain, and time could not erase them. Imagine standing before such a stone, the letters carved with careful strokes, still legible even after thousands of years. Each sign was a breath of a vanished tongue, the Hittite language, which lay forgotten for millennia until scholars pieced it back together. For centuries after the empire's fall, the words meant nothing to those who saw them, mysterious scratches on a weathered block. But the stone did not care. It waited, patient, as the empires of Persia, Greece, and Rome rose and fell in turn. It waited as villages grew, fields were plowed, and shepherds walked past. It remembered, even when no one else did. The Hittites had always thought in terms of permanence. When they swore treaties, they did not only invoke the names of gods but also carved those oaths into stone, as if to anchor them against the shifting tides of time. A treaty was not merely between two kings but between generations, binding their descendants. The kings would often call upon mountains, rivers, the heavens, and the earth to be witnesses to their words. And so, when the inscriptions survived, it was as if the earth itself had upheld its side of the pact, guarding the words even when no human hand remained to protect them. But let us step back into their world, to the moment before collapse. The Hittite Empire, at its height, stretched from the Aegean coast to the banks of the Euphrates. They clashed with Egypt at Kadesh, one of the largest chariot battles ever fought. They ruled over vassal states, their scribes recording everything in vast archives of clay. Yet their power was fragile, famine gnawed at their fields, rival states rebelled, new waves of people, the so-called Sea Peoples, pressed in from the coasts, and somewhere between 1200 and 1175 BCE, the empire unraveled. Cities burned. Hattusa itself was abandoned. The gods of the Hittites fell silent, and yet the inscription did not. Carved before the fall, it remained, a defiant echo. To walk among those ruins centuries later was to see silence everywhere, collapsed walls, tumbled gates, weeds growing where kings once walked. But then, in the midst of that silence, there were the words, still etched in stone. They were like a heartbeat in the dust, faint but steady, whispering that the Hittites had once been here, and that they had not gone quietly into forgetting. When archaeologists rediscovered Hattusa in the 19th century, they found not just ruins but thousands of clay tablets, brittle but preserved, locked in ancient storerooms. Among them were royal decrees, laws, and prayers, each written in cuneiform, sometimes in multiple languages. Slowly, patiently, scholars pieced them together until the Hittites spoke again after 3,000 years of silence. The inscriptions carved in stone, however, had already been speaking all along. They had never stopped. One cannot help but feel the weight of such words. Imagine a Hittite king standing before the stone, dictating to his scribes, as artisans carved his decree into the living rock. He would have known that kingdoms rise and fall, that wars are won and lost, but he trusted that stone would endure, and he was right. The empire he ruled collapsed. His descendants vanished into obscurity, but his words survived. Read now by strangers in a language resurrected from dust. The inscription that outlived its empire is not merely a survival of text, it is a survival of intention, a voice carried across time. It shows us that even when power is broken, even when palaces fall, words can remain, etched deep enough to resist oblivion. They may lie dormant, unread, for centuries, but when they are finally understood, they remind us that the past is never truly lost. If you stand among the stones of Hattusa today, the air is quiet, save for the wind and the cry of birds. The walls are broken, but the gates still rise, their lions weathered but proud, and somewhere in that ruined city, the inscription still lingers, its words steady, unbroken, remembering. You may run your hand across the grooves carved 3,000 years ago, and feel the stubborn presence of a people who refuse to be forgotten. In the end, the Hittites themselves could not keep their empire alive, but they managed something perhaps greater. They kept their voice alive, a voice in stone, an inscription that endured when even the name of Hatti was lost to memory. Long after the last Hittite king was buried, long after their cities turned to dust, the stone remained. It still does, whispering to those who come near, proof that words can outlast empires, and that memory, carved deeply enough, can survive the fall of worlds. And so the story closes, not with silence, but with the quiet endurance of words etched in stone, still speaking after 3,000 years. The stone that sang with water. Beneath the restless skies of the outer Hebrides, where the wind slides endlessly across the sea, and the moors stretch toward the horizon in muted tones of green and gray, there stands a stone that refuses to be forgotten. It rises from the earth like the final note of a song sung thousands of years ago, tall, narrow, and unyielding, its surface weathered by centuries of rain and salted air. The locals call it Clach or Trushal, the Trushal stone, and though to the casual passerby it may appear as nothing more than a solitary shard of ancient rock, the truth is that it carries within it the weight of untold generations, a memory etched into its very grain. It is the tallest standing stone in all of Scotland, over 6 meters high, and yet, despite its immensity, it stands alone. Unlike the grand rings of stones at Callanish, where companions form circles like gathered clans, Clach or Trushal keeps its vigil in solitude. But solitude does not mean silence. For this stone, the people once believed, could sing, not with a voice like our own, but with the soft and haunting resonance of water moving unseen beneath the earth, a vibration, a hum, a song without words. And so the story begins, not just with the stone itself, but with the land it inhabits. The Isle of Lewis, battered by storms, kissed by fleeting rays of sunlight, has long been a place where the veil between the known and the unknown feels thinner. The wind carries whispers across the peat bogs, the ocean pounds its eternal drum against the cliffs, and in the stillness between, one might hear something else, a note, a murmur, perhaps the song of Clach or Trushal itself. When you first walk toward it, the landscape stretches wide and sparse. Low hills roll like the backs of sleeping giants. The air smells of salt and moss, and the ground beneath your feet gives slightly, soft with peat and old rain. The stone appears suddenly, as though it has always been waiting at the edge of your sight. No walls enclose it, no markers fence it in. It simply rises, dark against the pale sky, and you find yourself drawn to it. They say it was once part of something greater, a circle of stones perhaps, a gathering place, a marker of seasons. But when the others fell, or were taken, or simply disappeared into the earth, Clach or Trushal remained, as though unwilling to surrender. And it is in this endurance that the stories grew. The people of long ago spoke of water running beneath it, invisible streams that carried sound in ways the ear could not quite explain. Place your hand upon the stone on a still day, they said, and you might feel a faint vibration, as though it were alive. Stand close during heavy rain, and the drops striking its surface would echo with an almost musical tone. And sometimes, when the winds were right, the stone seemed to hum, not loudly, not like a voice, but with the quiet resonance of a tuning fork, struck once, and still singing long after. The elders told the children that this was no ordinary resonance, but the voice of the stone remembering the footsteps of those who danced around it, remembering the voices of the priests or druids who once spoke to it, remembering the chants carried on the air. Every sound, they believed, was absorbed, and in time, released back again, woven into the air like a soft echo. This is why they called it the stone that sang with water, because water is memory. Flowing rivers carve the earth but also carry whispers with them, and beneath this stone, so they believed, a current passed. It was not just a monolith planted by human hands, it was a bridge between earth and water, silence and song. If you let your imagination drift, you might picture the people who raised it. Perhaps they were the ancestors of those who built Callanish, or perhaps they were wanderers who brought their knowledge across the sea. They would have hauled it upright with ropes of woven grass, levers of wood, and the sheer determination of dozens of hands. Why here, in this spot? Perhaps because the water beneath the earth ran strongest here. Perhaps because the horizon in this place aligned with the winter solstice, or the summer sunrise, or the turning of the stars. But once it stood, it became more than stone. It became a witness. Think of the centuries it has endured, the Viking raids that swept across these islands, the clans that rose and fell, fighting battles in the heathered hills, the farmers who cut peat from the bogs, and the fishermen who mended nets in the biting wind. Through it all, Clach and Trushal stood unmoving. Children leaned against its side, old men told stories in its shadow. Lovers carved their initials in its surface, long since worn away by rain, and still, in its stillness, it remembered. Folklore clings to it like mist. Some say it was once the site of a battle, that two clans met here, and the ground drank deeply of their blood. Others claim it was a place of oaths, where promises were bound and curses spoken. The stone, silent as it appears, was said to judge, to remember not just words but truth itself, and in the silence of the moors, that truth could never be forgotten. There are those who believe the stone carries a curse, that to lie in its presence is to be undone. Others whisper that on certain nights when the moon rises low and the tide pulls hardest, one can hear voices around it, as though the circle of stones still stands, invisible, with companions unseen. The connection to water is never far from these tales. The rain, which falls often and heavily in Lewis, was said to awaken the stone's voice most clearly. When water streamed down its face, the vibrations deepened, the resonance richer. To those who listened with care, the drops did not simply strike and vanish, they lingered, merged, and formed a melody, one no human hand could compose. And so villagers passing by would sometimes pause in the rain, lift their faces to the sky, and listen. And in listening, they felt less alone. The stone did not offer answers, it did not give comfort in words. But its presence, its hum, was steady. It was eternal where human life was fleeting. It was memory when human memory faltered. Even now scholars study it. Archaeologists note its dimensions, its weight, its alignment with the land. Geologists speak of the rock itself, quarried perhaps from nearby hills. But beyond the science lies something less measurable. To stand before Clach and Trushal is to feel the weight of time press gently against you, to feel that something vast and enduring is listening. And perhaps that is why it still matters. In an age of noise and endless distraction, this solitary stone teaches silence. It teaches patience. It reminds us that not all songs are heard with the ears. Some are felt through the earth beneath our feet, or in the hush of rain on stone. So imagine yourself there now, standing on the windswept moor, the sea at your back, the sky vast and shifting above. The stone rises before you, tall, dark, scarred by centuries. The wind moves through the heather, rain begins to fall, lightly at first, then in a steady rhythm. The drops strike the stone, one after another, until they blend into something that is not quite sound, not quite silence. You close your eyes, you listen, and slowly, you hear it. A hum, a note, a song woven of water and stone and time. A song that does not need words, because it is older than language. A song that belongs not just to the stone, but to the land, to the people who once gathered here, and to you, standing quietly now. The stone sings, and in its song, it remembers. The seal that carried 1,000 names. In the ancient lands of Sumer, long before cities rose into kingdoms and kingdoms into empires, there existed objects small enough to be held in the palm of one's hand, yet powerful enough to carry the weight of lives, identities, and legacies. Among the clay tablets, reed huts, and riverside rituals, there was something so unassuming that to look upon it, one might dismiss it as a bead or a trinket. But it was more than ornament, it was more than decoration, it was a signature, a memory, a voice pressed into clay. It was the cylinder seal, the tiny carved stone that carried 1,000 names. Imagine walking through the streets of or Uruk at dusk. The walls of mud brick homes glow with the soft reflection of a low sun. The air smells of baked earth, reeds, and roasting grains. Donkeys bray in the distance, their hooves clattering against stone. The wide avenues are busy with merchants, scribes, farmers, priests, and children tugging at the hems of their mothers' woven linen garments. In the crowded markets, the cries of traders mingle with the metallic ring of scales, weighing barley, silver, or wool. Amid the bustle, there is order, contracts made, agreements struck, promises given. But how does one keep a promise in a world before paper, before ink, before handwriting as we know it? How does one prove a grain sale, a shipment of copper from faraway lands, or a debt that must be repaid when the moon has cycled thrice? In Sumer, the answer lay not in a signature, but in a seal. The cylinder seal was no larger than a finger, often carved from stones like lapis lazuli, hematite, chalcedony, or serpentine. Through its length ran a hole, so that it could be strung onto a cord and worn around the neck or wrist like an amulet. Its surface was etched in reverse with figures, gods with horned crowns, kings raising their arms in prayer, animals, geometric patterns, and most importantly, the names of those who owned them. When rolled across wet clay, the images would spring to life, leaving behind a repeating line of scenes and symbols that told the world, this is who I am, this is my claim, this is my authority. To press a seal was to leave a voice in clay, a farmer sealing a jar of grain left behind, not just a mark but a declaration. These stores belong to me. A merchant sealing a tablet of trade left his name entwined with the goods exchanged. A scribe sealing an agreement ensured that no one could later claim the words had been altered. The seal was identity, ownership, law, and memory condensed into a single portable artifact. Yet the magic of the cylinder seal lay not just in its practicality, but in its intimacy, for to carry one was to carry yourself, your lineage, your honor. They were passed from father to son, or given as gifts of trust, symbols of partnership, tokens of favor. They were buried with the dead, so that even in the silence of the grave, one's name would still be remembered. Picture a craftsman in ancient Sumer, crouched beside his workbench, a slab of polished stone before him. His tools, small barons of copper and chisels honed on sandstone, glint in the flickering light of an oil lamp. He leans forward, peering at the narrow cylinder in his hand. Every line must be perfect, every figure carefully reversed, so that when pressed into clay, the scene unfurls in clarity. His breath slows, his hand steadies, and slowly he carves. Tiny marks, deep grooves, the curl of a bull's horn, the feathers of an eagle, the cuneiform strokes of a name. The work may take days, even weeks, but when finished, the seal will outlast him. It will bear not his name, but the name of the one who commissioned it. A name rolled across clay thousands of times, carried through transactions, across temples, markets, and storehouses. When archaeologists first uncovered cylinder seals in the ruins of Sumer, they were astonished not only by their beauty, but by their resilience. Clay tablets crumbled, walls collapsed, but the seals endured. In the ruins of Uruk, in the graves of royal queens at Ura, in the archives of scribes, these tiny cylinders surfaced again and again. Some were found still strung with beads, worn smooth by touch, carried like one might carry a locket or a ring. Others were buried in sealed jars, as if waiting for their owner to return and press them once more into soft clay. Consider for a moment what it meant to press a seal upon a tablet. A merchant and a scribe sit together at a low table of wood. The scribe has already written the agreement in neat, wedge-shaped signs, so many measures of barley to be delivered, so many shekels of silver owed, a time for repayment fixed by the cycles of the moon. The merchant nods, satisfied. Then he reaches for his seal. He unloops it from his neck, the cord slipping through his fingers. He presses it into the clay, rolling it carefully so that the figures emerge. Perhaps a scene of him standing before a god, hands raised in reverence, his name carved above. He lifts the seal, and there it is, his identity, captured in miniature. The scribe adds his own seal, perhaps the seal of the witness as well. Now the clay carries more than words, it carries lives, names, the weight of agreement. Over centuries, these seals carried not just the names of men, but the presence of gods. On many seals, divine figures appear. Inanna, goddess of love and war, standing upon a lion. Enki, god of wisdom, with streams of water flowing from his shoulders. Shamash, god of the sun, rising between mountains. To roll such a seal was not merely to mark property, it was to invoke the divine, to declare that one's dealings took place beneath the gaze of the gods themselves. And in that way the cylinder seal became more than identification. It became a form of storytelling. Unlike the rigid lines of cuneiform, which captured speech, the seal captured vision. A scene rolled across clay told a story in images. A man led by a god into the presence of another deity, a banquet shared among worshippers, a lion struck down by an archer. Each image spoke without words, carrying meaning to any who looked upon it. Some seals were simple, carrying only the most basic names and marks. Others were intricate, masterpieces of miniature art. The seal of a king might show him towering above his enemies, weapons raised. The seal of a priest might depict him in devotion, pouring libations before a sacred tree. The seal of a merchant might show caravans of camels or ships upon the water, a symbol of trade stretching beyond the horizons. And always, at the heart of the seal, the name. Names carved deep, names pressed into clay, names repeated again and again until they outlived the people who bore them. For though the men and women of Sumer passed into dust, their seals endured. Their names carried on, whispered through time by the stone that bore them. In the royal cemetery of Ur, archaeologists uncovered graves rich with treasures, lyres with golden bullheads, inlaid gaming boards, cups of precious metals, but alongside them lay the cylinder seals, small and humble, yet no less meaningful, for in death, as in life, one could not be without one's seal. To be buried with it was to carry one's identity into eternity. And so, when we hold one today, when we turn it in our fingers and feel the grooves carved thousands of years ago, we are not just holding stone, we are holding a name, we are holding the echo of a life once lived, the presence of a person who walked the streets of Sumer, who bargained in its markets, who prayed in its temples. The seal whispered their name once into clay, and now, across millennia, it whispers again. The cylinder seal was 1,000 things. Signature, contract, memory, prayer, talisman, art. But above all, it was permanence. In a world of fleeting lives, fragile clay, and shifting empires, the seal endured. It carried names through time, long after voices were silenced, long after empires crumbled, long after Sumer itself was forgotten. And so we remember them, the seals, the names, the people who pressed them into clay. Their 1,000 names live on, etched forever into the stone that carried them. The crown that refused its king. The desert does not hurry. It holds its breath across the centuries, letting the sand carry secrets that the wind cannot scatter. Beneath the pale moon, dunes ripple like frozen waves, and sometimes, if you walk long enough, you may find shapes half swallowed by the earth. Broken pillars, worn staircases, stones cut by hands long vanished. They are the bones of Persia, still resting in silence, though once they stood in power. Among these fragments, there is a story told of a crown unlike any other, one said to gleam even in the dark, forged with purpose but unwilling to serve. Some called it cursed. Others said it was holy. Most believed it dangerous, not because of what it was, but because of what it refused to do. The crown that refused its king. It was not just metal and jewels, nor only an emblem of authority. It was thought to be something more. A vessel of memory, a judge of worth, a thing that could choose. In a land where kings rose and fell like stars across the horizon, this crown was different, because it would not bend. It would not be worn by just anyone. And so across generations, it outlasted the rulers who sought to master it, remaining strangely aloof, as though it belonged not to men, but to Persia itself. Let us walk slowly into its story. It begins in the time when the empire was still young, when Cyrus the Great's vision had stretched across deserts and mountains, binding peoples together under a banner of something larger than conquest. Babylon had been taken, Egypt subdued, and the boundaries of the known world seemed to bend toward Persia's will. Yet no empire is ever satisfied with itself. There are always ambitions deeper, dreams sharper, desires more unyielding. In the great halls of Persepolis, where columns rose like a forest of stone, and staircases were carved with processions of tribute-bearers, artisans worked day and night. They crafted vessels of silver, gates of cedar and bronze, reliefs that depicted not just kings but the peoples of all nations, the Elamites, the Lydians, the Greeks, the Medes, all walking in procession toward the throne. It was here, they say, in workshops hidden beneath the palace floor, that the crown was first made, but not made in the usual way. It was not hammered out quickly for a coronation, nor meant as a simple ornament to impress foreign envoys. Its creation took years, perhaps decades, overseen not just by metalworkers but by priests, astronomers, and scribes who read the stars. Some whispered that its design was older still, drawn from patterns of the Medes, or even from civilizations that Persia had swallowed but not erased. The base was said to be forged from a mixture of gold brought from India and silver drawn from the mountains of Anatolia, fused in fire until the metals no longer warred but shimmered together. Upon it were set stones gathered from every corner of the empire, lapis from Bactria, turquoise from the deserts, garnets from Armenia, emeralds from Egypt. Yet the most curious thing was not the jewels or the metal, but the inscriptions carved into it. For around the rim, in letters small enough that the eye could barely see, was etched a litany of names. Not names of kings, but names of gods, cities, rivers, mountains, and forgotten rulers. The very geography of Persia seemed to speak from its surface, as though the crown had been designed not to belong to a single man, but to the land itself. And when it was finished, the crown was brought into the light. But something strange happened. Cyrus himself is said to have looked upon it, yet he did not wear it. Perhaps he felt it was not his. Perhaps he feared it. His successors tried, but each time the crown resisted. It would slide from the brow. It would grow unbearably heavy, or, in some tales, it would vanish, carried off by loyal servants to be hidden again. And so it earned its reputation. The crown would not choose just anyone. It would not sit lightly on a head unworthy. Years passed. Kings came and went. Cambyses, Darius, Xerxes. They waged wars, built roads, commissioned palaces. They sat on thrones of gold, received tribute from nations, held banquets where wine was poured from golden rhytons shaped like lions and eagles. Yet the crown lingered at the edges, a shadow of authority, never fully claimed. One story tells of Xerxes, the great king who marched against Greece with his vast army. Before setting out, he tried to wear the crown, believing that such a symbol would terrify his enemies. But the moment it touched his head, his skin burned as though struck by the desert sun. He cast it aside in fury, demanding it be locked away in Persepolis. And though he conquered many cities, though he burned Athens itself, he never returned with victory enough to wear what he had once sought. Another tale comes from later, when the empire was older and the Seleucids had begun to press against its borders. A pretender rose in the east, claiming descent from Cyrus, and sought the crown to prove his legitimacy. Yet when he placed it upon his head, it slipped, falling to the ground with a sound that echoed like thunder. His men deserted him soon after, convinced that no ruler whom the crown rejected could lead them. Over and over, the pattern repeated. The crown lingered, half seen, half believed, carried from treasury to treasury, wrapped in silks and guarded by priests. Some said it had grown restless, that it whispered at night to those who kept it, reminding them of oaths sworn and forgotten. Others claimed it shone with an inner fire whenever unworthy hands drew near, as if to warn the world away. But perhaps the strangest part of the crown's story is this: it was never truly lost. Empires crumble, capitals burn, treasures are plundered. The palaces of Persepolis fell to Alexander's torch, the libraries scattered, the roads broken. Yet somehow, the crown escaped. Some said Alexander himself sought it, but when he drew near, it was gone. Others claimed it traveled east with priests who refused to see it in foreign hands. Still others swore it sank into the desert, buried by sandstorms, waiting. Centuries stretched into centuries. The Parthians rose, then the Sassanids, their kings adopting new crowns, taller and more elaborate, hung from golden chains so heavy they could not rest on the head without support. Yet beneath it all there were whispers that the true crown, the one forged in the time of Cyrus, still lingered, choosing no man, waiting for no master. It is said that even when the Arab armies came, when fire and faith swept across Persia, the crown endured, hidden, perhaps, carried by families who remembered, buried in caverns where the desert wind cannot reach. A thing of legend, yes, but also a thing that could never quite be forgotten. What was it then, this crown? Was it simply a story told by those who doubted their kings, a myth invented to remind rulers that their power was fragile, that no throne was truly secure? Or was it something more, an object imbued with meaning beyond metal and jewel, beyond human hand? Perhaps the crown was not meant to be worn at all. Perhaps it was a mirror, meant to show kings their own unworthiness. Perhaps it was the land itself, refusing to be claimed by a single man. For Persia was vast, stretching from river valleys to mountain ridges, from fertile plains to barren deserts. Could any one ruler, no matter how great, truly contain it? And so the crown remained silent. It did not vanish into legend the way so many treasures did. It hovered, always at the edge of memory, like a voice you cannot forget but cannot place. Some believe it still lies beneath the ruins of Persepolis, sealed in chambers where even archaeologists have not yet reached. Others claim it was carried east into the mountains, guarded by families whose names no longer appear in records. There are even those who whisper it may still gleam faintly in secret vaults, passed quietly from age to age, never settling, never choosing. Because the crown was not for kings. The crown was Persia itself. And so, when you stand before the broken pillars, when you walk the wide staircases where stone lions guard the steps, when you touch the sun-warmed bricks of Persepolis, or gaze across the empty desert, remember this: power may rise, cities may fall, kings may demand obedience, but some things, the land, the people, the memory of what was, will not bow. The crown waits still, and it remembers. The chalice that emptied itself. In the hushed silence of an ancient chamber, beneath the weight of countless centuries, a vessel rests. It is only a cup, some would say, shaped with delicate hands that have long since turned to dust. Yet this chalice carries with it a question that has never truly been answered. How could a piece of clay fired in the kilns of Greece pour itself empty without the tilt of a hand, without the lift of a wrist, without the will of a drinker? They called it a puzzle, some called it magic, others swore it was the work of gods, a warning wrapped in pottery, a silent lesson disguised as a drinking cup. This is the story of that chalice, the vessel that emptied itself. It is said that in the time of Polycrates, when islands floated like stepping stones across the Aegean, when philosophers gathered in shaded courtyards, and when artisans bent over their work until their eyes blurred from the firelight, there was a man who thought of fairness in every sip. His name has passed through history, sometimes whispered as Pythagoras, the thinker who gave numbers their rhythm, who saw the universe in balance and proportion, and from his mind, it is said, came this vessel, this strange chalice, where the very clay seemed to obey the laws of justice more than the whims of the drinker. The chalice was simple in shape, at first glance, a rounded bowl rising gently from a short stem, a form not unlike many other cups that crowded the tables of symposiums. Wine would be poured, diluted with water as custom demanded, the surface gleaming with reflections of torchlight and stars. Yet hidden inside the stem, coiled like a secret, was a passage no casual eye could see. For this chalice was no ordinary vessel. It was a siphon in disguise. Fill it modestly, and it would behave, holding the wine patiently. But fill it greedily, beyond a certain line, and the liquid would vanish, rushing away through the stem, leaving the cup and the drinker with nothing. It was, perhaps, a lesson shaped in clay, a reminder that greed empties the hand, that too much is less than enough, that moderation guards while excess destroys. And so the chalice came to be known not just as a trick of engineering, but as a voice of philosophy, a vessel that spoke without words, teaching each drinker about balance. Imagine now the first gathering where it was used. A table laid low, cushions scattered about, guests reclining as servants moved among them with pitchers, laughter spilled as freely as the diluted wine, the room thick with the scent of olives, roasted barley, and burning oil lamps. A host raised the strange cup, filled it nearly to the brim, and with a mischievous smile passed it on. The guests leaned forward, watching. The liquid held steady for a moment, then without warning drained away, leaving only emptiness. A gasp rose from the gathering, followed by laughter, the mystery of it delighting them more than the taste of wine itself. And yet, beneath the amusement, a quiet unease lingered. For was this not a trick of the gods, a warning to mortals who thought themselves beyond restraint? Some called it the cup of justice, others, the Pythagorean cup. In later centuries, it would even be called a cup of greed. But to those who first held it, it was more than a curiosity, it was a mirror for human desire, showing how easily fullness becomes emptiness when one reaches too far. The chalice itself was small, but its story grew large. It traveled, perhaps not in its clay form alone, but in memory, in imitation, in whispered tales told along harbors and marketplaces. For merchants who crossed the seas would carry not only amphorae of oil and bolts of dyed cloth, but also stories to be unpacked at foreign hearths. And so the idea of a self-emptying cup spread, reaching ears that had never seen its working with their own eyes. In the hills of Ionia, a child might hear of it from her grandfather, told as a fable at dusk. In the courtyards of Athens, it might be spoken of as a clever toy of philosophers, a puzzle that mocked the greedy. In Sparta, perhaps, it was retold as a stern reminder that excess leads only to loss. And yet, the chalice was real. Not just myth, not just parable, but clay shaped by human hands, with channels carved inside like secret veins. Archaeologists, centuries later, would dig through the earth of Samos, the island where Polycrates once ruled, and there among shards and broken walls they would find fragments of cups with hollow stems. They would puzzle over them, piecing together the mechanism, tracing the way the siphon would work, until once again the cup revealed its lesson. What had seemed like magic was only physics. What had seemed like divine warning was human craft. Yet was that not more wondrous still, that human thought could shape clay into a parable so enduring? The story of the chalice, though, does not belong only to engineers and scholars. It belongs to dreamers as well, for who among us has not filled their cup too high? Who has not reached for more than their share, only to find their hands suddenly empty? The chalice whispers across time, saying gently, "Take only enough, and enough will remain." Picture now the ship of a merchant, sailing westward with goods for trade. The sea is calm, the sails full, the crew resting after a long day. Among the crates lies a cup, perhaps even such a chalice. At night, when the stars blaze overhead, one sailor lifts it curiously, tilts a skin of wine into it, and drinks. He marvels at its trick, and in the quiet laughter of that discovery, a lesson travels across the waves, born not in scrolls but in simple clay. The centuries pass, empires rise and fall, the temples crumble, the philosophers' voices fade to echoes. Yet the chalice remains, unearthed from dust, restored in thought, its mystery retold in books and classrooms, in museums where children press close to the glass. Even today, in the modern age, replicas are made, cups that drain themselves when filled too high, sold as novelties, taught as examples of ancient ingenuity. And so the chalice still teaches, long after its maker has been forgotten. But let us wander back, slowly to the beginning, to the quiet workshop where the first of these cups was shaped. The air smells of clay and smoke, the potter's wheel spins gently, and a man sits hunched in thought. He does not think of wealth or power, but of balance, of how the universe holds itself together, of how a string vibrates at just the right length to make harmony. And from these thoughts, from the search for harmony in all things, comes the idea for a cup that will punish greed and reward moderation. His fingers trace the stem, shaping the hidden channel, smoothing the clay until it seems ordinary. Only when fired in the kiln and filled to the line will the secret reveal itself. And so the chalice is born, not just an object, but an idea strong enough to outlive cities, strong enough to outlast kings, strong enough to sit quietly on a museum shelf while generations pass by, still puzzled, still wondering, still learning. The chalice that emptied itself was never only about wine, it was about us, our hungers, our reach, our endless desire to grasp more than we need. It shows us gently, almost playfully, that the hand which clutches too tightly will soon find itself clutching nothing. And perhaps, in that gentle reminder, lies the reason why it has never been forgotten. Even now, if you close your eyes, you can almost feel it, a simple cup, cool and smooth beneath your fingers. You pour a little, and it waits. You pour more, and it holds, but pour just beyond the hidden line, and suddenly, all is gone. A laugh escapes you, soft, surprised. And in that moment, the chalice has taught you what no lecture could ever make you feel. It is only clay, only a cup, and yet within it lies the wisdom of ages, the chalice that emptied itself. The book that couldn't be read. The Book of Kells rests today in quiet stillness, deep in the hushed halls of Trinity College in Dublin. Behind glass, beneath carefully measured lights that neither blind nor fade, it lies in its protective casing. To the casual visitor, it might seem a book like any other, though older, stranger, its letters curling in elaborate spirals, its pages a whirl of colors that have somehow survived for centuries. Yet for those who linger, who let their eyes soften and follow the winding knots, the endless coils of ink, and the painted animals hidden in margins, there arises a sense that the book itself is alive. It feels less like something you read, and more like something that reads you. The Book of Kells has been called a gospel, a relic, a masterpiece of insular art, and sometimes, when people lean too close, when they whisper in the presence of its pages, it is called the book that could not be read. It is said to have been written around the year 800, when Ireland was not the bustling land of cities it is now but a landscape of scattered monasteries and windswept fields. The island was filled with stone beehive huts, with monks bent over wooden desks, and with the cries of seabirds circling the Atlantic coast. At that time, words were not merely read, they were sung, whispered, breathed. They carried divine power. And so, when the Book of Kells was created, it was not a book of convenience, nor something meant for daily study. It was something beyond, a mystery wrapped in vellum. The book is vast, both in size and in its refusal to be simple. Each page is parchment, made from the skin of calf, scraped thin and smoothed. Hundreds of calves must have been sacrificed to make it, so already, before ink even touched the surface, the book was costly beyond measure. And into these pages were poured endless hours of labor, scribes and illuminators, bending over in dim light, their quills dipping into pools of ink, their fingers stained, their backs bent for decades. When you look at the Book of Kells, you are struck by its brilliance. Gold and purple, orange and deep green, cobalt blue that still glows though the centuries have passed. And yet if you try to read it, if you attempt to follow its words, you quickly find yourself lost. Letters swell into strange spirals, words disappear into knots of ornament, animals leap out of the margins, and faces peer from behind the letters themselves. What should be plain text, the gospel, becomes a labyrinth. Many have asked, was it ever meant to be read at all? Perhaps it was meant only to be seen, to dazzle, to remind viewers of the heavenly. A monk might hold it aloft during Mass, its pages shining in flickering candlelight, the words unread but unmistakably holy. In this way the book carried silence as much as it carried words. It was both scripture and symbol, and its beauty spoke more loudly than any sermon. Legends grew around the Book of Kells, as they do around anything too grand to be fully understood. It was said the angels themselves guided the quills of the monks, whispering instructions for every twist of every letter. Others said that the book contained not only the Gospels but secret knowledge, hidden in its designs, things no one would ever be able to decipher, because they were not written for human eyes. And there were darker tales too, that the book had once been stolen, carried off in the night, and when it was returned, a third of its pages were gone, and no one knew who had taken them or why. Imagine now, 1,000 years ago, in a monastery on the windswept Isle of Iona, off the coast of Scotland, where the book may first have been created. The sea crashes against the rocks, and inside the scriptorium, monks bend over their work. The air is thick with the smell of ink made from oak galls, with pigments ground from crushed minerals, lapis lazuli, brought all the way from distant Afghanistan. The monks' breath clouds in the cold air. Their hands shake, but still they work, steady, deliberate, knowing that each line, each knot, each detail is more than decoration. It is prayer. The silence is heavy. Only the scratching of quills breaks it, but in that silence, each page grows louder, filled with spirals and animals and faces until the book itself seems almost to speak. And yet, when the Vikings came, bringing fire and iron, the monastery was attacked. Some say the book was carried away then, across the sea to Kells, to be hidden, preserved, guarded by monks who knew what it was. It arrived in Ireland, battered, but alive, and there it stayed. For centuries it passed from hand to hand, always treasured, always protected. It is strange though that through all those years the Book of Kells never became simply a book. Always it was something more. Scholars tried to read it, but the text wandered. Priests opened it, but the words dazzled rather than instructed. And common folk, when they glimpsed it, spoke of its magic, its curse of silence, that a book so filled with words could not in truth be read. Some said that if you tried too hard, if you forced yourself to decipher it, the letters would shift beneath your eyes, changing places, rearranging into patterns that made no sense. Others swore that in the margins, where cats and otters and serpents twisted in eternal knots, they saw the animals move, just slightly as though alive. The Book of Kells became in this way, both holy and untouchable. It was used in ceremonies, placed upon altars, but rarely read. Its power was in its presence, in the weight of it, the shimmer of its pigments, the way it seemed to hold not only the Gospels but something more mysterious, something unspoken. As centuries passed, the world around it changed. Empires rose and fell. Ireland knew conquest, famine, rebellion. But through it all, the book remained. At times it was hidden, kept safe in monasteries, in strongboxes, wrapped in cloth. At times it was displayed, admired by kings and scholars, and still it carried its silence, a silence deeper than words. Even now, when visitors lean close, pressing against the glass at Trinity, they often fall quiet. They might not understand the Latin, they might not be able to trace the sentences, but still, they feel it, that sense that the book speaks, though not in any tongue we know. Some art historians say the silence is deliberate. The book was meant to be dazzling, overwhelming, a vision of divine order too great for comprehension. Others suggest it was unfinished, abandoned before it could be made legible. But perhaps the truest answer is that the Book of Kells was never meant to be read in the ordinary sense at all. Its curse, its mystery, is that it holds words that cannot be spoken, images that cannot be explained. It asks us not to read but to look, to lose ourselves in its endless spirals until we too fall into silence. The pages whisper in their own way, not through sound but through pattern, spirals that wind inward like thoughts, outward like prayers. Interlaced animals chasing one another forever, never catching, never breaking free. Letters that grow so large, so ornate, that they devour the words they were meant to form. This is not a book for readers, it is a book for dreamers. And so across more than 1,000 years, the Book of Kells has held its silence. It has outlived its makers, its monks, its thieves. It has survived wars, fires, exile, neglect. It has crossed seas, been carried by trembling hands through dark nights, and still it waits, resting on its stand, behind its glass, in the dim-lit hall of Trinity College. The tourists shuffle past, their voices hushed, their cameras lowered. The book lies still. It neither reveals nor hides. It simply is. And perhaps that is its final secret, that it was never meant to give answers, never meant to be deciphered. Instead, it was meant to remind us of mystery, of silence, of the spaces between words. For in that silence, in that unreading, something greater happens. We are reminded that not everything is meant to be known. Not everything can be spoken. Some things must simply be seen, held in the quiet of the heart. And so, the Book of Kells remains the book that could not be read. A curse, perhaps, or perhaps a gift. For what is silence, if not another kind of language? The crown that was too heavy to wear. There is a crown in Italy, kept behind glass, locked away in the quiet hush of Monza Cathedral. To see it, one must pass through soft corridors where light filters dimly through centuries-old windows. It is not large, not studded with hundreds of jewels, not even symmetrical in the way most crowns are. It is plain, almost modest, but for more than 1,000 years, it has been whispered about, revered, feared, and at times, treated as if it were too heavy to rest upon any king's head. They called it the Iron Crown of Lombardy, and within its quiet circle of beaten gold lies a story woven from myth, politics, faith, and the endless passing of empires. The story of the crown begins not with goldsmiths in Lombardy, but with something far older, far darker, and far heavier. For at its heart, within the thin band of beaten gold, there is said to be a strip of iron. Not iron forged in ordinary fires, but iron that once belonged to a nail driven into wood, long ago, in the crucifixion of Christ. The legend claimed that Saint Helena, mother of the Emperor Constantine, discovered the holy nails in the 4th century when she journeyed to Jerusalem in search of relics. One she cast into the sea to calm a storm, another she turned into a bridle for her son's horse, and still another, it was whispered, was shaped into a thin band of iron that would, in centuries to come, form the hidden skeleton of this crown. It is impossible to know whether this tale is true, and yet, for medieval kings, truth mattered less than belief. To wear a crown that contained within it a fragment of Christ's crucifixion was not simply to wear a symbol of kingship, it was to place upon one's head the weight of sacred destiny. To refuse it was unthinkable. To doubt it was dangerous. And so the crown, even though it was small and somewhat crooked, gained a gravity beyond measure. The Lombards, who came to Italy from the north in the 6th century, were the first to bind their rule to it. They were outsiders, warriors who swept into the rich Italian plains after the fall of Rome, and they needed legitimacy. Rome's emperors were gone, but the people still remembered crowns, rituals, and holy relics. And so, in Monza, where Queen Theodelinda built a church in honor of St. John the Baptist, the crown came to rest. With each king who placed it upon his head, the Lombards sought to root themselves deeper into Italy's soil. Yet even then, the crown was already a puzzle. It was too small to fit most adult heads, so it often had to be perched precariously or held in place during ceremonies. Some whispered that this was fitting, that true kingship was never meant to be comfortable, that to rule was to balance something impossibly heavy, even when it looked deceptively light. When Charlemagne marched into Lombardy in the 8th century, defeating the Lombard king Desiderius and claiming Italy for himself, the crown passed into Frankish hands. It was no longer simply a Lombard relic. Now it was the Iron Crown of Italy, a prize that every emperor who sought to rule the fractured lands of the peninsula desired. Charlemagne himself was crowned with it, though he already wore other crowns, one as King of the Franks, and one, most famously, when Pope Leo III placed upon his head the crown of the Roman Empire in 800. Yet this crown, small and crooked as it was, mattered deeply, for it bound him not only to Rome's legacy, but also to Italy's, and through Italy, to the ancient memory of empire itself. As centuries turned, the crown's legend only grew. Emperors of the Holy Roman Empire traveled to Monza, or to Milan, or to Pavia, wherever the crown happened to be held safe, in order to place it on their heads. The ritual became known as the coronation of the kings of Italy, separate from the grander coronation as Holy Roman Emperor in Rome, or Aquin, but it was always with this crown that the claim to Italy was sealed. The crown itself, however, resisted easy possession. It was carried from place to place, guarded, hidden, stolen, restored. Fires threatened it, wars nearly lost it, yet somehow it endured. When emperors wore it, they often remarked upon its strange lightness in appearance, but its heaviness in meaning. Some even swore that the band of iron inside made it literally heavy, though modern eyes often miss it entirely. In Monza's treasury, one can still see it, 6 golden plates, each encrusted with a few jewels and enamel images of Christ and angels, joined together by hinges. Not a grand circle of uniform gold, but something pieced together, patched, as if reminding kings that their rule too was only ever partial, temporary, fragile. And yet, it was holy, or so they believed. During the Middle Ages, when the papacy and empire were locked in endless struggle, the crown was a weapon of symbolism. Whoever wore it could claim Italy. Whoever could not was diminished. The coronations were never peaceful affairs. Armies stood nearby. Rival claimants sometimes prepared their own ceremonies with rival crowns. But still, the Iron Crown retained its aura. It was the relic that kings could not ignore. Then came the Renaissance, and with it, shifting powers. The crown passed from emperor to emperor, but it also began to inspire scholars and poets. They looked upon its crooked form and saw in it a metaphor for kingship itself, awkward, heavy, sacred, and yet ultimately too small for the vast ambitions of men. By the time Charles V, the great Habsburg emperor, wore it in the 16th century, its aura had only deepened. He knelt in Bologna, crowned with the little circlet of gold and iron, and the chroniclers recorded that it was as if all of Italy bent with him. But the crown, like all relics, could not escape time. By the 17th and 18th centuries, wars swept through northern Italy. The Habsburgs claimed the crown, then lost it, then claimed it again. French armies threatened it, local dukes sought it. Yet through all this turmoil, the people of Monza held it safe. They polished its plates, guarded it in its treasury, and repeated the old legend, that within its heart was a nail of the crucifixion, a band of iron sanctifying every head it touched. When Napoleon arrived in Italy in 1796, he too could not resist its power. Though he dismissed many old rituals, he understood the weight of symbols. In 1805, he had himself crowned in Milan with the Iron Crown, declaring, Dieu me l'a donné, gare à qui la touche. God has given it to me, woe to him who touches it. He was no Lombard, no Holy Roman Emperor, but still, he bent his head beneath the crooked little band of gold, as if to claim continuity with every king and emperor before him. Yet even Napoleon found it too heavy. His empire stretched across Europe, but the crown's weight was more than territory. It was tradition, memory, the long shadow of sacred legend. When he fell, the crown was returned to Austria, and then, in the 19th century, it became a relic of a different kind, no longer the possession of emperors, but of the Italian nation itself. For when Italy sought to unify, when kingdoms and city-states struggled to forge themselves into one country, the Iron Crown reappeared. It was brought forth to crown Victor Emmanuel II as King of Italy in 1866. Now it was not about emperors and popes, but about a nation reborn, and yet the old whispers remained that the crown was too small, too crooked, too heavy, because no single head could truly bear the weight of Italy. Today, in Monza, the crown rests quietly. Tourists approach it with hushed voices. Some see only a small, ancient artifact. Others feel the centuries pressing in around it. The kings who bowed, the emperors who claimed it, the battles fought for it, and somewhere, deep in its golden plates, lies that strip of iron, whether or not it truly came from Jerusalem, whether or not it ever touched the wood of the cross. It is there, hidden, silent, a reminder that even the plainest objects can carry the heaviest burdens. The Iron Crown of Lombardy has been worn by conquerors and unifiers, pretenders and saints, emperors and kings, and yet in every story, there lingers the same refrain: it was too heavy, too heavy. Not because of its weight, but because of its meaning. To wear it was to wear not just gold and jewels, but history, legend, and the expectations of centuries. And perhaps that is why, more than 1,000 years later, it remains behind glass, waiting, watching, too heavy for any head to bear again. The ring that counted the seasons. There are objects in this world that feel older than time itself. Things shaped not only by human hands but by the endless turning of the seasons, by soil and stone, by the quiet persistence of memory. Some are coins, others are fragments of tools, a shard of pottery, a carving left on a wall. But every now and then something is uncovered that carries with it the feeling of a life, its choices, its triumphs, its anger, its loss. In the green countryside of England, where the air is often cool and damp, where fields roll like a quilt stitched together over centuries, one such object was found. It is called the Ring of Silvianus, a golden band, small, heavy, carved with words, and cloaked in a mystery that scholars have wrestled with for nearly 2,000 years. Some call it a cursed ring, others think of it as a relic of faith, but beneath all the interpretations lies something more human, the story of a man, his grievance, his attempt to reach beyond the mortal world for justice. And perhaps, if you let your mind rest against the rhythm of history, you may hear what the ring itself has to say. The story begins not with the ring's discovery, but with its loss. Imagine, if you will, the England of the 4th century. Not the England of castles, nor of knights, nor of kings. This is Roman Britain, when legions marched the roads they built, when villas stood across the countryside with mosaic floors, when baths and temples dotted the towns. But it was also a place of edges, of borderlands. To the north lay the wild Picts, to the west the unconquered hills of Wales. Rome's order extended here, but only just. Somewhere in this frontier life lived a man named Silvianus. We do not know much of him, except for his name and his fury. His life is not written in history books. He was not a general, not a senator, not even perhaps a soldier. He was, most likely, a man of modest standing, someone who could afford a gold ring, but not the power to protect it. One day, perhaps on a walk, perhaps during a visit to a bathhouse, perhaps even while praying in a temple, the ring was stolen from him, and Silvianus, rather than let the theft go, decided to act. In the Roman world, one could appeal to the gods for justice. In temples, priests would perform rituals of cursing, depictions, inscribed tablets of lead, upon which words of binding were carved. These were rolled, folded, pierced with nails, and offered up to divine forces. They asked for vengeance, they called down misfortune upon enemies. And Silvianus, a man robbed of his gold, did exactly this. On a tablet uncovered near the Temple of Nodens at Lydney Park, a curse was found. Its Latin words still hold their sharpness, even now. To the god Nodens, Silvianus has lost a ring. He has given half of its worth to Nodens, among those named Senecionath. To none grant health, until he brings back the ring to the Temple of Nodens. There it is. A voice from centuries ago. A plea for divine retribution. A name, Senecionath, the man accused of theft, and the vow, half the ring's worth given to the god in exchange for the punishment of the guilty. The curse tablet and the ring were not found together, but they are bound by language. For the ring itself bears an inscription. Carved into its gold surface are the words, Senecionae vivas, in Deo, Senecionaths, may you live in God. What did it mean? Was it the thief himself, arrogantly marking his prize with his own name? Was it a declaration of faith, or a mocking twist of words? Or could it be that the ring once belonged to Senecionath, and Silvianus claimed it unjustly? The truth is blurred, but the tension between those two names, Silvianus and Senecionaths, hangs across time like the echo of an argument left unresolved. The ring itself is large, too large to be worn comfortably. Scholars believe it may have been meant to sit on a gloved finger, or even as a votive piece rather than an everyday ornament. It is heavy, wide-banded, gleaming with the dull gold of centuries. To hold it now is to feel both the fragility and permanence of human life. How quickly it can be taken, how long its shadow can last. When the ring was lost, it did not vanish from history entirely. Buried in the earth perhaps by Senecionaths himself, it lay hidden for over 1,000 years. Seasons passed, winters froze the soil, springs softened it again, leaves fell, rotted and returned to earth. Farmers plowed, and their children plowed after them. The Roman villas crumbled, the legions left. Saxons came, Normans came, kings rose and fell. And through it all, the ring remained, patient beneath the Gloucestershire fields. It was only in the 18th century that it was finally unearthed, found near Silchester. By then, no one remembered Silvianus, or Senecionots, or the god Nodens, but the mystery remained intact. Scholars puzzled over it, collectors kept it, and in time, it found its way to the grand halls of the Vine, a Tudor mansion now cared for by the National Trust. There it sits, not just a piece of gold, but a question that refuses to settle. But perhaps the most curious part of the story is not its Roman past, but its modern echoes. For when J.R.R. Tolkien, the great writer of myths, was invited to examine the curse tablets of Lydney Park in the 1920s, he would have read the story of Silvianus and his stolen ring. He would have read of Senecionus, cursed forever unless the treasure was returned. He would have seen the heavy band of gold, its strange inscription, its sense of doom. And not long after, he began to write of another ring, a ring of power, one that corrupted its bearer, one that drew men to betray, one that carried a curse across generations. Did Silvianus's fury inspire Tolkien's imagination? We cannot say for certain, but the echoes are difficult to ignore. Perhaps the ring of Silvianus whispered not only to gods, but also to storytellers. Imagine holding this ring in your hand. It is heavier than you expect. Its surface is marked with scratches, its edges softened by time. The inscription is faint, but still legible, letters that tie you directly to the Roman world. And you think of the men whose lives brushed against it. Silvianus, the man who lost it. Senecionus, the man accused. The priests who prepared the curse tablet. The farmer who, perhaps unknowingly, dropped his spade onto it centuries later. The antiquarians who catalogued it. The writer who may have dreamed a saga from it. And now, you. What is a ring, after all? A circle of metal, unbroken, eternal. It binds, it marks, it declares. It is a loop, a cycle, a season that repeats endlessly. And this ring, whether cursed or blessed, carries the turning of centuries in its band. As you let this story settle into your thoughts, notice how it feels to trace the path of an object through time. A single man's anger became an inscription, a curse, an artifact. It became a mystery, a legend, perhaps even an inspiration for one of the greatest tales ever written. And still it rests, silent in its display case, yet alive in the imagination of all who encounter it. The ring of Silvianus did not vanish when it slipped from its owner's hand. It endured, waiting for us, reminding us that even small things can outlast empires. And like the seasons, it continues to turn. The cave that dreamed in colors. Beneath the gentle hills of southwestern France, where the pastures roll in quiet greens and the Dordogne River winds slowly through its valley, there lies a secret that once only the earth itself remembered. Hidden under stone and soil, silent for thousands of years, is a place where time folds back on itself. A place where the walls do not simply stand in silence but shimmer with echoes of dreams painted in colors older than kingdoms, older than the words we speak, older even than the stories we know. This is the cave of Lascaux, a cave that dreamed in colors. If you walk the valley above it today, you would hear the familiar sounds of rural life, the distant bleat of sheep, the quiet creak of trees swaying with the wind, the crunch of boots on paths worn by centuries of farmers. Nothing in the landscape hints at the marvels beneath. To the casual traveler, it seems a countryside like any other. But just below, tucked away in darkness for millennia, is a gallery made not by kings, not by priests, not by architects, but by hands so ancient that their owners have no names. These hands belong to people who lived before cities, before writing, before nations. They painted with a purpose that we can still feel, even if we cannot fully explain. The cave is a cathedral of stone corridors and chambers. To enter it is to step away from sunlight into a cool hush where every sound falls softer, where the air carries a damp heaviness, and where each step feels like a trespass into the most intimate spaces of the human imagination. The walls curve and fold as though they are alive, and it is on these surfaces that the artists of 17,000 years ago chose to leave their visions. They did not carve idols of stone or build pyramids that rose to the sky. Instead, they painted life as they knew it, animals in motion, herds galloping, creatures in tension and grace, all captured in strokes of ochre, charcoal, and manganese. The first images you meet are horses, not still, not frozen, but alive in their charging poses. Their manes flare, their legs stretch forward as though they are truly running. Some are painted in rich red tones, others in deep black outlines, some in blends of yellow and brown that mimic the colors of fur under shifting light. Their bodies ripple across the uneven rock, so that when you move a torch past them, the curves of the cave itself give them motion. It is almost as if they breathe. You cannot help but think the artists wanted not just to show horses, but to summon them, to let their power and speed live on these walls forever. Deeper inside, aurochs, the great wild cattle of prehistoric Europe, take their place. Towering in scale, painted with sweeping horns and heavy bodies, they dominate whole chambers. The sheer size of them overwhelms the space, pressing their presence upon you as though the cave is their pasture and you are the visitor. Near them stags stretch their antlers skyward, bison stamp and clash, and ibex climb across the stone ledges. Everywhere there are animals, painted with such precision that you can see the curve of a shoulder, the tension in a leg, the shimmer of fur implied with a careful brush of pigment. These are not crude sketches, these are masterworks of observation, of skill, of deep connection between human and animal. And yet, among the swirling herds, there are mysteries. Some figures are less clear, more symbolic. Strange signs appear, dots, grids, branching shapes. They seem deliberate, repeated in places, yet their meaning is lost to us. Were they tallies of hunts, markings of seasons, symbols of stories told long ago around fires? We do not know, and perhaps we are not meant to. For the people who painted them, meaning was not written in books but breathed into caves, remembered in the rhythm of footsteps, in the crackle of firelight on walls. In the Hall of the Bulls, perhaps the most famous chamber, the walls swell with an enormous composition. 4 giant bulls, painted with immense horns that curve longer than their real counterparts, dominate the scene. Around them, horses gallop, deer leap, and smaller figures weave in and out. The layering suggests not a single event, but a tapestry of moments, painted and repainted over time, as though generations added their own breath to the dream. Imagine the glow of torches flickering across those painted horns, shadows dancing, bulls seeming to move with the light. It is not hard to believe this was a place of ritual, a place where art and spirit touched. There is one image deeper still that has puzzled all who see it. It is the so-called shaft scene, hidden in a narrow passage difficult to reach. There, painted with a raw strangeness unlike the naturalism of the animals, is a man. He lies seemingly fallen, beside him a bird perched on a staff, and in front of him a bison with entrails spilling from its side. The scene is haunting. Was it a myth? A vision? A story told in paint that only those who belonged to the people could understand? It is singular, unique and enigmatic. Some call it the earliest narrative scene in history, a moment frozen, carrying meaning that may never again be fully known. To stand before these walls is to feel the hum of human memory, not memory written in words but in images, in gestures. The caves were not dwellings. People did not live here day to day. They came here with purpose, carrying pigments ground from earth and minerals, binders made of fat and plant resin, tools carved of bone and reed. They mixed colors in stone palettes. They blew paint through hollowed bones, spraying pigments to create soft edges and silhouettes. They held torches of pine wood that smoked and flickered, so they had to move quickly, shadows shifting as they worked. The very act of painting was alive, a performance between fire and stone. What drove them? We cannot say. But when you let the silence of the cave surround you, you begin to sense that it was more than art. It was ceremony, memory, devotion. The animals were not just food. They were spirits, teachers, forces of nature. Painting them may have been a way to honor, to summon, to connect. Each line of pigment was not only an image but a bridge. For thousands of years, the cave lay undisturbed. Seasons came and went above it, snow falling, rivers rising, empires rising and collapsing, all while the horses still galloped in their hidden gallery below. No eye saw them, no foot disturbed the silence. Until, in 1940, a group of boys chasing their dogs stumbled upon the entrance. They lit a lamp, squeezed through a narrow passage, and their light fell on the painted walls. Imagine that moment. Imagine being 14 years old and suddenly seeing animals run across stone in colors brighter than you thought possible. A world you thought was gone, suddenly alive before you. They had uncovered not just a cave, but a time capsule of human imagination. Word spread quickly, and soon scholars, artists, and travelers came to see. The cave was opened to the public in 1948, and thousands of visitors walked through its chambers. But the cave was delicate. The breath of so many visitors, the carbon dioxide, the moisture, even the bacteria we carry began to affect the paintings. Slowly, signs of decay appeared. Colors dulled, fungi grew. It was as if the cave resisted the gaze of too many eyes, as if it wanted to return to silence. And so, in 1963, the cave was closed to preserve it. Today, only specialists may enter, and replicas, painstakingly recreated down to each crack and pigment, are shown nearby for the world to see. Yet the original remains there, still in the earth, still dreaming in its darkness. Horses still run, bulls still thunder. The fallen man and the bird still wait in mystery. In that silence, they belong to both the past and the present, reminders of who we are, of how long we have been dreaming. For when you leave Lascaux, you carry something with you. A sense that the human spirit has always reached beyond survival, that even in ages we call primitive, there were those who painted with vision, with tenderness, with awe. They remind us that art is not luxury, it is as ancient as breath. The cave dreamed in colors, and through those colors we still dream. And so, as the night deepens, imagine those torchlit chambers. Imagine the quiet figures painting in silence, the air filled with smoke and pigment, the walls alive with animals. Close your eyes, and you can almost hear the hooves, the stamp of bison, the breath of stags. They are there, in the dream of the cave, waiting, watching, forever running in the flicker of firelight. The mask that wept green fire. Beneath the humid canopy of the Chiapas jungle, where the air itself seems to shimmer with heat and cicadas sing their endless hymn, lies a place that once bore witness to the dreams of kings, the city of Palenque. Even now, when its temples sit in quiet ruin, moss drinking from the cracks in stone and vines coiling themselves possessively around staircases that lead nowhere, the city still breathes. It breathes through the walls etched with glyphs, through the open mouths of carved stone gods, through the silence that gathers beneath the vaulted chambers. But most of all, it breathes through the mask that wept green fire. They found it in the tomb of a king, a resting place long sealed beneath the temple of the inscriptions. It was not a mask of war, nor one of performance, but of eternity, made of hundreds of tesserae, small and carefully carved fragments of jade, pieced together like the skin of a dream, each sliver of stone polished smooth, each curve following the contours of a human face, the lips shaped into stillness, the eyes open yet not alive. And yet, when the flickering torchlight of the first explorers fell across it, something strange happened. The mask shimmered, not merely the glossy surface of jade catching flame, but something deeper. The green flared, not like stone, but like embers hidden within leaves, like fire that had chosen disguise. It seemed to glow from within, as though the breath of the king himself had never truly left. The king's name was Kinich Janaba, Pakal the Great. To the Maya of Palenque, he was no mere mortal. His reign stretched long, like the roots of the ceiba tree that bound the heavens, earth, and underworld together. He was crowned in youth, lived into great age, and was laid to rest in the heart of the temple he had ordered raised. His face preserved not by flesh, but by the eternal green of jade. But the mask carried more than his likeness. The mask carried a story. When you stand in the ruins of Palenque today, the jungle presses against you. Leaves drip with the night's condensation. The calls of unseen animals echo through the dark. But if you let yourself drift, if you close your eyes and let the weight of centuries lean upon your shoulders, you can almost hear another sound, the chanting of priests, the scrape of stone tools carving glyphs, the dull thud of drums echoing across the plazas. And somewhere, above it all, the whisper of jade as it weeps in silence. What does it mean for jade to weep? What does it mean for a mask to burn without fire? To answer that, we must begin not with the king's death, but with his life. Pakal was crowned in the year 615 CE, at just 12 years old. A boy king, seated upon a throne too large for him, draped in ceremonial garments heavy with jade and feathers. The Maya believed jade was the stone of breath, the very essence of life itself. To wear jade was to carry the breath of the gods. To wear it in death was to ensure that breath did not fade, but traveled into the underworld, sustaining the soul on its journey. So when the boy grew into a man, and the man into a ruler, jade became his second skin. Bracelets, necklaces, ear spools, pectorals, all shimmering green fire against the brown of his flesh. The city knew him as divine. The jungle whispered his name. And the mask was waiting. It is said that when the artisans of Palenque first cut the slivers of jade, they did so not by sight alone, but by listening. They pressed each fragment against their ears, waiting for the stone to hum. Some stones were silent, others murmured, but a rare few sang. These were the stones chosen for the king's mask. Stones that remembered rivers, stones that remembered mountains, stones that carried secrets of the earth older than the Maya themselves. Piece by piece, the artisans gave the king a new face. A face that would not wither, nor wrinkle, nor fall prey to death. A face of eternity. But eternity has weight. The mask, though silent, was said to stir in moonlight, to gleam brighter when offerings were made. And to those who guarded it in later centuries, after Palenque had fallen into ruin, it was said the mask carried a presence, that those who gazed upon it too long would feel their chest tighten, their breath catch, as though the mask itself was borrowing their air, taking their breath, to keep the king alive. Was it merely imagination, or was there truth hidden behind the green? The explorers who uncovered Pakal's tomb in 1952 were stunned not only by the mask, but by the sheer magnitude of what surrounded it. The sarcophagus lid itself was carved with one of the most intricate reliefs of the Maya world, Pakal descending into the jaws of the underworld, yet also rising like a sprout, reaching toward the world tree, his rebirth encoded in stone. The chamber walls bore glyphs that spoke of his life and his lineage. But it was the mask that held their eyes. Even today, when the mask rests in secure display, separated from its tomb, it still draws people with the same inexplicable gravity. They lean forward, faces reflected in the glass, and see themselves mingled with the green. For a moment, the boundaries blur, your skin and his jade, your breath and his silence, your eyes and the empty sockets of eternity. And that is when the fire begins. Not literal fire, of course, but something stirs in the mind, a glimmer that seems alive, just at the edge of vision, a green that burns not with heat, but with memory. The mask remembers. It remembers the prayers whispered into the night as incense coiled upward toward the stars. It remembers the weight of flowers laid at its altar. It remembers the jungle rains hammering down on the temple above, the stone groaning beneath the pressure of centuries. And it remembers the breath of a dying king, exhaled for the last time, captured forever in the jade of his face. And so, they called it the mask that wept green fire, not because it burned with destruction, but because it burned with presence. The way grief burns in silence, the way memory burns in stillness, but the story is not yet finished. For masks, after all, are not only to be worn by the dead. Some say that in hidden chambers beneath Palenque, other masks remain. Masks of priests, masks of queens, masks meant not to preserve, but to conceal. Some whisper that jade masks were more than funerary offerings, that they were keys to doors that could not be seen, only felt. That to wear the mask was to step between worlds, to walk along the Siba routes, neither in this world, nor the next. And if that is true, then what of Pakal's mask? Was it meant only to guard his face in death? Or was it meant to allow him to return, again and again, slipping through the roots of the world tree, his face glowing with green fire as he watched over his people? The jungle has its own way of keeping secrets. Roots coil around stone, swallowing inscriptions. Rain erases murals, time crumbles temples, and yet the mask survives. It survives because jade does not die. Jade carries breath, and as long as it breathes, the king is not gone. Close your eyes. Imagine standing in the tomb, torchlight flickering, the mask staring back at you from the sarcophagus. Imagine the silence, so heavy you can hear your own heartbeat. And imagine just for a moment that the mask leans forward, that it breathes with you, that its fire stirs, green and endless, within your chest. Would you look away, or would you let it take you? The mask waits. It has always waited. And this is only the beginning of its story. The night has grown deeper, and with it, the quiet weight of stories that settle over stone, jungle, and time. When last we wandered together, we stood in the tomb of Pakal the Great, our eyes following the soft gleam of jade, tracing the contours of the mask that covered his face. A mask that seemed alive, even in stillness, as if it had drawn the fire of the earth into its cool green surface. We listened to the hush of his people, the Maya of Palenque, who carved their visions into walls, who dreamed their gods into forms of stone and blood, and who laid their king to rest with the promise that his spirit would not end, but instead ascend into the ceaseless movement of sky and star. Now we linger here again, as though our footsteps never left, as though we too were part of that long vigil. The mask remains before us, yet it seems altered in the dim shifting of thought and imagination. In this part of the tale, we follow not only the silence of his tomb, but the echo of his afterlife, through the centuries of discovery, loss, wonder, and unease. The mask does not simply rest. It breathes in the imaginations of those who have gazed upon it. It whispers not in words, but in impressions, as though its jade surface was never truly meant to remain silent. It is strange to think that such an artifact lay undisturbed for more than 1,000 years, the jungle growing over the city that once thrived, the earth pressing its weight over the temples, while rain and vines twisted themselves through stairways where kings had once walked. Palenque fell silent, its courts abandoned, its plazas overtaken by roots, its carved glyphs weathered by storms, and yet under that silence, the mask remained untouched. No hand disturbed its glow until modern eyes, in their hunger for what the past hides, stumbled once more upon its chamber. But the rediscovery was not smooth, nor easy, nor kind. Centuries after Pakal's burial, the city of Palenque had become a ruin, its temples mysterious in the green folds of the Chiapas jungle. Spanish colonizers heard rumors of lost cities, but they could not comprehend the meaning of these moldering stones, only that they were remnants of some people whose greatness they had already broken. Local villagers knew the ruins well. They told stories of haunted halls, of gods who lived inside stone walls, of serpents that curled themselves into the corners of fallen roofs. For many, the ruins were not dead, but sleeping, and best left untouched. It was in the 18th and 19th centuries that explorers began to cut their way through the jungle, sketching the temples of Palenque with wide eyes, marveling at their strange hieroglyphs, so unlike the letters they knew. When these drawings reached Europe, they were met with disbelief. Surely the jungle of Mexico could not hold a city so graceful, so carefully built with its soaring pyramids and delicate carvings. Many dismissed the accounts as exaggerations, the romantic inventions of restless travelers. Yet others, scholars and wanderers alike, felt the pull of mystery, and so more expeditions returned. Among those who pressed into the city, there grew whispers that the tomb of a great king was still sealed, hidden within the temple of the inscriptions. Local guides warned of it, saying that the temple itself seemed to resist intrusion. Some nights, strange sounds drifted from its stones, like the hiss of water that had no spring, like the rattling of feathers where no birds could be seen. Superstition held that the king's spirit was still awake, and that disturbing him would bring calamity. Yet curiosity is rarely silenced by caution. In the 20th century, excavations began with new determination, and the sealed tomb of Pakal was at last breached. Workers and archaeologists, their lamps throwing weak circles of light against walls carved 1,000 years before, descended into the chamber. What they found stunned them, not an empty vault, not a plundered ruin, but a burial untouched, a ruler still adorned with the treasures of kingship, and upon his face, the mask, its jade still gleaming, as though no time had passed at all. Imagine that moment, the stale air rushing out of the chamber like a sigh, the weight of centuries pressing close, the first glint of green as torchlight caught the surface of the mask. To stand before such a sight was to feel the fracture of time itself, as though Pakal had been waiting, patient and silent, for the world to return to him. Some of those present swore later that the mask seemed to shimmer unnaturally, that its glow was too vivid for mere stone. One man even claimed he saw a flicker across its eyes, as though behind the jade slits something still lingered, something watching. The archaeologists, of course, did not dwell on such thoughts. They catalogued, measured, documented, carried the treasures carefully out into the light of day. Yet once the mask left its tomb, its presence seemed to change. The people of Chiapas murmured uneasily about it, calling it an object not meant to be moved. It is the face of a god, some said, and gods do not like to be disturbed. As the mask traveled, studied, displayed, locked away, it gathered a reputation for quiet strangeness. Curators reported that the glass of its display case fogged unexpectedly, even when no one had touched it. Visitors sometimes complained of dizziness or an odd ringing in their ears when they looked at it too long. A guard at one exhibition swore that during his late-night rounds the mask appeared to shift ever so slightly, its mouth curving downward in a grimace, though by morning it was serene again. Most dismissed such tales as tricks of the mind, the brain inventing life where there is only stillness. And yet, as with all artifacts that carry the essence of an ancient world, the whispers have never faded completely. The Maya, after all, did not craft their objects merely as decoration. To them, jade was more than a precious stone, it was life itself. Its green mirrored the maze that fed them, the breath of the wind through the forest, the renewal of growth after rain. To cover a dead king's face in jade was to grant him a new body, to cloak his departing spirit in the eternal fabric of nature. The mask was not simply an image, it was a vessel. Perhaps that is why it unsettles those who look upon it. For though jade is stone, it was chosen to pulse with the memory of breath. Perhaps in some quiet way it still does. And so the mask lives a double life. In one sense, it is studied, admired, and protected, a treasure of a vanished civilization. In another sense, it remains active, a participant in the endless weave of myth. For those who gaze too long upon it, the thought sometimes arises unbidden. Does the mask still dream? Does Pakal, behind that frozen expression, still know that his face is carried forward into centuries he could never have imagined? It is said that jade can hold heat if clasped in the hand, its surface warming slowly as though it listens to the body. Some who have handled the mask during conservation efforts reported that it felt strangely warm already, before their fingers touched it, as though it had been resting against the skin of a living being. They described the sensation with unease, as though they were not handling an artifact but intruding upon something still alive. In this way the story of the mask grows, its myth interwoven with memory and speculation. Perhaps it is nothing more than the mind's restlessness, searching for life in the inanimate. Or perhaps in the quiet depths of jade, something ancient still stirs. Close your eyes for a moment, and imagine again the tomb, the faint green glow of stone upon the king's face, the silence pressing in like the weight of earth itself. Imagine how many eyes have looked upon it since, how many thoughts it has absorbed, how many breaths have fogged the glass that now protects it. The mask weeps no tears that we can see, and yet, in stories told quietly, it is said that when the light catches it at the right angle, a faint sheen trickles across its cheeks, a trick of reflection, or perhaps, as some whisper, the fire of life still trying to escape. And so we leave it here for now. The mask of Pakal the Great, luminous and enigmatic, weeping green fire across centuries, its silence heavier than words, its mystery deeper than history. The scroll that spoke in a forgotten tongue. It is not always the grandest monuments of stone that carry the greatest mysteries. Sometimes, the most puzzling echoes of the past are small, portable, fragile things, carved not into mountainsides or temples but into palm leaves, bark, or wood. On a remote island in the Pacific Ocean, one of the world's most baffling riddles lies etched not on vast statues or towering ruins, but in careful, looping glyphs pressed into wooden tablets. They are called the Rongo Rongo tablets, and they whisper a story that no one alive today can fully read. When you hear the name Easter Island, or Rapa Nui as its people call it, you probably imagine the moai, the towering stone heads staring out to sea. They are the icons of the island, immense in presence, mysterious in origin, and endlessly captivating. But alongside them, hidden in museums, private collections, and a few glass cases, rests another treasure. Unlike the moai, which can be studied in the open air, these treasures must be preserved carefully, because they are made of wood, and wood does not survive well in the salty Pacific wind. The Rongo Rongo tablets are small, some no larger than a sheet of paper, others the length of a man's arm. Across their surfaces, in tightly packed rows, are carved strange signs, looping figures that seem halfway between writing and pictures. Some resemble birds, others human-like forms, fish or plants. Some are abstract curls and lines. Together they look like a script, a system of communication, a written tongue. And yet the meaning is gone. No one today knows what they say. Imagine it, a culture that left behind giant statues that we can still see, and also a written script that no one can read. It is as if they left a letter, a message to the world, carefully written, but in a tongue no one alive can now understand. It is like stumbling upon a diary written in a forgotten alphabet. You know the writer is trying to tell you something, but you cannot grasp the words. That is the Rongo Rongo puzzle. When outsiders first arrived on Rapa Nui, they marveled at the statues. They described the islanders as remarkable navigators and builders. But when they noticed the wooden tablets, they thought little of them at first. Missionaries, who came in the 19th century, saw the carved wooden boards as relics of pagan belief. Many were collected, burned, or lost. Only about 24 survive today, scattered across the world in museums in Santiago, Honolulu, St. Petersburg, London, and a handful of other places. The tragedy of their survival is that by the time scholars began to take them seriously, the people who had once read them no longer could. The knowledge of Rongo Rongo had vanished, erased by colonization, disease, cultural suppression, and time. When researchers asked elders on Rapa Nui in the late 1800s about the carvings, some said that once, generations ago, their ancestors had known how to read them. But now, the knowledge was gone. A few claimed fragments of memory, songs, chants, or interpretations, but nothing that could unlock the script fully. The last chain in the link had broken, and so the Rongo Rongo tablets became a mystery that sits in a kind of limbo. We know they are important, we know they must say something, but the language lies beyond us, in silence. If you were to hold one of the tablets, you would notice something curious about the way the text runs. It does not flow left to right, or right to left, like most familiar scripts. Instead, the lines are written in what scholars call reverse boustrophedon. That is a Greek word meaning as the ox turns, a way of writing where the lines alternate direction, like an ox plowing a field. On one line, the text flows left to right. On the next line, the text is rotated and runs the other way, so you must turn the tablet upside down to continue reading. Imagine trying to read a book where every line alternates not just direction but orientation. That is how the Rongo Rongo script moves. It is as though the writer wanted the reader to physically rotate the tablet as they moved along, making reading a ritual act in itself. This is the first strange hint. Rongo Rongo was not casual writing, scribbled quickly to record transactions. It was formal, deliberate, carefully arranged. It seems meant for sacred texts, chants, or records of great importance. So what do they say? That is where the story deepens into mystery. Over the decades, scholars have proposed dozens of theories. Some suggest that the tablets record genealogies, lineages of chiefs and kings, carried down the generations. Others think they are agricultural calendars, marking when to plant and when to harvest, tied to the rhythms of the sun and moon. Still others believe they record myths, songs, or prayers, preserving the oral traditions of the island in wooden form. But the truth is, we do not know. The signs remain undeciphered, and because so few tablets survived, and because no bilingual text has ever been found, no Rosetta Stone that could link Rongo Rongo to a known language, decipherment has proven nearly impossible. Some scholars have tried to count the signs, classify them, search for patterns. They note repetitions, recurring bird-like figures, sequences that look like verbs, and others that might be nouns. But without a living tradition, all of it is guesswork. Rongo Rongo remains one of the last great undeciphered scripts of the world. Now imagine being on the island centuries ago, before the coming of Europeans, when the knowledge was alive. Perhaps in a ceremonial house lit by fire, a tablet would be placed in the lap of a chanter. Around them, the community would gather. The chanter would turn the tablet, reading the glyphs aloud in song, weaving a tale of ancestors, gods, and cycles of time. The Rongo Rongo was not just writing, it was performance, it was memory, it was power. Think too of the immense effort needed to keep that knowledge alive. Every generation, elders must have trained apprentices to read and chant. Each glyph had to be memorized, each sequence recalled. To lose one link in the chain of transmission was to lose the whole tradition, and eventually, that is what happened. Yet the script survives, etched into wood, carried across oceans into distant museums, waiting, like a locked door with no key. It tempts the imagination. What if hidden in those lines are stories we have never heard before? What if they contain the names of kings long forgotten, myths of creation unique to the island, or records of great voyages across the Pacific? What if they preserve wisdom about survival, in isolation, lessons that resonate even now? To read Rongo Rongo would be to hear the island's ancestors speak again, but for now, they remain silent. And so, the scroll that spoke in a forgotten tongue rests in twilight. Neither alive nor entirely dead, neither understood nor wholly erased. Each tablet is a ghost of language, carved in wood, waiting for the day when someone, somehow, will listen closely enough to hear the words again. But the story of Rongo Rongo is not only one of loss, it is also one of resilience, because the people of Rapa Nui, despite colonization, despite devastating population collapse, despite the suppression of their culture, are still here. They still sing songs, still tell stories, still remember, and while they may not read the glyphs of Rongo Rongo anymore, they embody the same spirit of survival that allowed their ancestors to carve meaning into wood in the first place. The tablets are not just relics, they are bridges, and even if the bridge does not yet carry us all the way across, it stands, waiting. As the night deepens, imagine the sound of waves breaking against the shores of Rapa Nui. Imagine the silhouettes of the moai, standing in their silent ranks, while somewhere in a museum case, thousands of miles away, a small wooden tablet rests in the dark, covered in signs no one can read. Imagine what it would feel like to be the one who finally, after centuries, unlocks their meaning. For now, the Rongo Rongo remains a dream, half heard, half seen, a language asleep, but dreams sometimes wake again. The island had grown quiet after the last storm, its cliffs washed clean of salt, and the palm fronds heavy with the scent of rain. The night sky stretched wide, scattered with stars that seemed closer here than anywhere else on Earth. The waves kept their patient rhythm, as if they too were waiting for the answer that had been hidden in the tablets of wood, those strange marks that refused to surrender their voice. In the villages, life moved slowly, but always the presence of the scrolls lingered. Even when tucked away in missionary chests or buried in the sand, their memory hovered in the air. Some of the old men said that the signs carved on them were not meant for human eyes alone, but for the gods who once walked the island. Others whispered that the signs held the names of every ancestor, written not in sounds but in the patterns of the stars above. Still others feared they were warnings, recorded in a tongue the islanders had forgotten, but which still echoed faintly through dreams. The priests who once guarded them had long vanished. The last chants were sung generations ago, and the rituals that gave the tablets their life fell silent. Without the cadence of human voices, the signs grew still. What once was a language flowing like water hardened into silence, each symbol a locked gate without a key, and so the scrolls sat in the dim corners of churches, or in the cramped study of sailors who brought them home, or in museums that could only display them like mute witnesses to something vast and lost. And yet, each time someone tried to trace the signs with careful eyes, something stirred. They were not random. The carvings were precise, repeating, like the heartbeat of a pattern. A bird with wings folded, a fish curled against itself, a man bent at the waist, walking, a crescent like a new moon, the same figures appearing again and again, as if singing a refrain. It was not nonsense, it was not chance, it was a language, one that simply no one alive remembered how to speak. Scholars came, from far-off continents. They held the tablets under lamps. They copied each line onto paper. They arranged the glyphs into columns. Some believed it was a form of proto-writing, not words but memory prompts, signs meant to awaken the recitation of chants. Others swore it was true writing, equal to Egypt's hieroglyphs or the cuneiform of Mesopotamia. But each attempt to unlock it stumbled at the same place. There were no Rosetta Stones, no bilingual texts, no living memory to guide the hand, only rows of figures, patient as the rocks that stood guard along the shore, and still the tablets waited. On the island itself, the elders carried another kind of memory. They told the story of Hotu Matuta, the first king who sailed from a faraway land with his followers. They spoke of a time when the land was lush with trees and the earth yielded abundance. They spoke of a time when the gods were nearer, when voices rose in the night in chants that summoned their power. The tablets, they said, belonged to that time. To read them was not merely to know words, it was to step back into that age when the boundary between human and divine was thinner. Some even said the tablets were alive, that when they were read aloud in the old tongue, they shimmered faintly, glowing with a green-blue light, like the sea at dusk, that the chants filled the air so richly that birds circled overhead, caught in the rhythm, that if the wrong person spoke them, sickness would follow, or the crops would fail, or the sea itself would grow angry. Whether these were memories or warnings, no one could tell, but the fear that lingered around the tablets was as real as the waves that crashed against the cliffs. The scholars in Europe who received some of the tablets did not feel this fear. To them they were curiosities, evidence of a people at the farthest edge of the world, who had invented something astonishing, only to lose it. They spoke of it in journals, they displayed them in cabinets, they marveled at the density of signs. Some even tried to count the characters, over 100 distinct figures, perhaps more, too many for mere decoration, too structured for chance. And so they argued, had this small island so isolated, created writing on its own? If so, it was one of the rarest feats in human history. But the islanders themselves knew that the tablets were not inventions, they were inheritances, passed down, protected, bound to chance and memories. When the old ways were broken, when the missionaries forbade the rituals, when the last of the chanters died without apprentices, the chain was severed. Without living voices, the tablets became husks, and so we are left with silence. But silence does not always mean absence, sometimes it is waiting. Imagine, if you will, walking into a dim room where one of the tablets rests. The wood is weathered, darkened by time, its edges chipped by hands that once carried it across the island. Your eyes follow the lines, rows carved with care, each figure no taller than a fingertip. They march in order, left to right, line upon line, so precise that one wonders how many years it took to carve a single tablet. You reach out, not to touch, but to follow the grooves with your gaze. Bird, fish, man, crescent, bird again. The pattern pulls you onward, as if your mind is being invited into a rhythm older than your body. For a moment, you wonder, what if the language is not lost? What if it is still there, resting like embers that only need breath to glow? What if, in some quiet night, an islander humming to himself might slip into the right cadence, and suddenly the signs would awaken, and the chants would rise again? The scrolls seem to hold their breath, and then the waves outside remind you, centuries have passed. The chain of voices was broken. The island has changed. Palms that once shaded the earth are gone. The great statues stand with backs to the sea. The rituals are memory. Perhaps the tablets are only wood now, mute relics of a people who once spoke with the gods, or perhaps they are waiting for the right tongue to return. The scholars say the odds are slim. Without a living key, the language may remain locked forever, and yet they still pore over the signs, night after night, sketching and comparing, refusing to accept silence. Because to give up would be to accept that an entire voice of humanity has been erased. And something in us resists that. We want the tablets to speak again. The islanders, too, sometimes dream of them. They say in dreams the signs glow faintly, and if you follow them they lead you to the cliffs where the ocean spreads like ink into the night. They say the tablets whisper in sleep, in words the waking mind forgets. That perhaps the ancestors are still trying, still leaning close, still reminding us that voices never truly die. They only sink into deeper waters, waiting for someone brave enough to dive and bring them back. The scroll that spoke in a forgotten tongue does not speak aloud anymore. But if you listen carefully, in the rhythm of the sea, in the songs of the wind, in the memory carried by the island, you might almost hear it. Not words, not sentences, but the echo of something vast. A voice that once bound a people to their gods. A voice that still hums beneath the silence of the present. The story of the Rongo Rongo tablets remains unsolved. Perhaps it always will. But perhaps that is what makes them powerful. They remind us that language is not only a tool for speech, but a vessel for memory, for faith, for the bond between the living and the unseen. They remind us that forgetting is never total, that somewhere, in dreams or in silence, voices linger, and so the scrolls wait, their signs etched deep in wood, their meaning hidden, but not gone, waiting for a voice, waiting for a tongue that has not yet been born, or one that sleeps within us still, waiting, patient as stone until someone listens deeply enough to hear them speak again. Have you felt the weight of history tonight? The mysteries we uncover may never give us their answers, but they remind us how vast, strange, and beautiful our past truly is. Thank you for wandering through these secrets with me. If you enjoyed this journey, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who loves hidden history as much as you do. And before you go, tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching from tonight? Until next time, rest well, dream deeply, and remember, the past is never as far away as it seems.